Hello, everybody. Um, how's it going? How's it vibing? Is okay. Okay, how about I had a problem. I had a problem. Okay, audio should be okay and not peaking. Last few streams that I had, I was like way too quiet, but now my microphone is working, so cool. I am anti Second Amendment. I don't think that people should own guns. So I do like Soylent, yes. So I have a very controversial opinion for right wingers. A lot of leftists are very libertarian on guns. I think it makes more sense for left wingers to be pro gun than right wingers. I think it's sort of backwards in this country. Okay, here's something I don't like. When I have the Soylent in frame, my camera gets all dark because it's trying to like read the light color in the Soylent. And now it gets light again. Ugh, I don't like that. Yeah, most people in the US who are pro gun are right wingers. Exactly, because lefties are more anti-authority. Whereas right wingers like trust cops and they trust law and order. So why do they think that they need to like take the power into their own hands? I think the other thing is that I'm very like anti-populist. So like I think that institutions are important and it's important for like the government to have monopoly on violence. We should bring on counterpoints. I think you said contrapoints. We should bring on contrapoints to the stream. Yeah, I bet she would love to come on. Libertarians and anarcho-capitalists are right wingers too. Yes. You did a super chat? What? Oh my god. Hold on. Go to my stream. I don't wait, maybe I don't have like super chats set up or something. Because I didn't see it. So probably not. That's true. Not all right wingers are pro cop, but I think that I don't know. I think the real tension in politics is like pro order versus anti order. Salvador. Hell yes. My stream is so scuffed. But that's okay. I'm embracing the scuffed stream. Exactly. It separates left from right. I think it mostly stems from pro hierarchy to no hierarchy. I agree. I agree. Oh, oh. Okay, we're gonna talk to Sprouticus in like 8 minutes. No, it's good. I support you taking over my chat. I added you on Twitter, so that might be what you're talking about, the Sprouticus. But who knows? I'm also, yeah, I don't know. I think you might have just gotten full about it. So I don't have a lot of clout. All of my clout is like in the sexy pictures world, less so in the politics world. That sure, dude, we're so wrong. You're so wrong. I think you just have a great stream, the Sprouticus. More DACA is good. It's DACA. I swear to God, if you guys are tricking me into saying the slur, DACA meaning. Firepower. Oh, here's the other thing. I woke up unbelievably late today. Perhaps the latest that I've ever woke up in my entire life, which is 1 p.m. And I know some people do that all the time, but like, that's crazy. Because I didn't even go to bed that late. I went to bed at like 1 ish, which is like fairly normal for me. And then I slept 12 hours. Crazy. Madness. I don't want to dox myself, but like where I live, it's often very late at night at like a consistent time. And so it's really hard for me to go to bed early because it'll be like my sleep will be interrupted. So I've just been like, my sleep schedule is like set up, so I tend to go to bed pretty late. Did I do strenuous activity? Not really. Do I deny the future of China? Here's a fun fact. I used to be like a major China simp. And I was always like, China's fascinating. China's like the future. And I read all these books on China. And like the more I read, the more disillusioned I became with China. And now I sort of think that China's like gonna really struggle in the future, in like the coming decades. I think China's in for like massive struggling. And I also think that like the more I learned about geopolitics in the region of like the South China Sea, the more I realize that like China is just like fucked. And that the United States is like so overpowered in like so many ways geopolitically. We're like, we basically have China like encircled in the South China Sea with like, imagine if China had like the US encircled around like both our coasts. It would be crazy. Um, China had the fastest growing economy. I think in the same way that Japan had like a crazy fast growing economy, and then Japan's economy nosedived. And China's been known to massage their GDP numbers, and now Xi Jinping has like staked his reputation on being able to control COVID, which has led to these like crazy lockdowns in major cities like Shanghai, where people are like being boarded into their homes. And it's just not sustainable. Like they don't need to do this anymore. But because they have like not great vaccine access, and like the vaccine access that they have is like not the best, uh, they like are really stuck behind between a rock and a hard place. And then they've had like now the world economy is going to go into like recession, which is going to also like heighten tensions. Plus, there's like a potential Taiwan struggle in the future, which if China is going to like take Taiwan, now is probably the best time to do it. But also like no time is good. Like this time is like also not like a great time to like conquer Taiwan. So here's the other thing though. If there's like currently a bill that's going through Congress, maybe it's already passed. I don't think it's already passed, but like there is discussion in the United States about bringing chip manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing to the US and like investing in it. And if we do that, Taiwan has this like silicone shield policy of like as long as the world is dependent on Taiwan for chip manufacturing, then the United States has like a big incentive to protect them. But if the US is no longer dependent on Taiwan, they don't need to protect them. So I think that if the United States brings chip manufacturing to the US, really invests in it, I think that's going to be pretty scary for Taiwan. Okay, the bill passed in the Senate. Nice. It's probably going to take a long time to get chip manufacturing up and running in the US. Here's the problem. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico needs to be a state. Finally, it needs to happen. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that like America already has chip manufacturing. It's just not like the newest forms of microchips. All right. Yo, Sprouticus. I actually don't know. Okay. Hmm. It is indeed. I mean, outside of like hunting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that the state should have a monopoly on violence, and part of that is taking away the ability of individuals to engage in violence. Guns are a force multiplier, so you're right that people can still be violent, but the scale of violence is different. What do you mean? Yeah, please provide the stats. Hmm.
Present a valid ID. They must go through a metal detector, turn over cell phones and cameras to guards. To actually buy a gun, customers have to show proof of honest income, provide references, pass a criminal background check, prove any military duties were completed with honor, be fingerprinted and photographed. If allowed to purchase the gun, the customer may only have buy only one gun, choosing from only 38 caliber pistols or lower, and one box of bullets.
So the thing with Mexico is that Mexico is like a barely functional state that can't control a lot of areas effectively. And so the reason why, like Mexico has like incredible violence, especially in like areas of northern Mexico. Actually, like it's very varied, but like the reason why you have so much violence is because you have like cartels which like legitimately control towns, and the Mexican state is just like not able to enforce laws in these areas. And that's horrible, right? Because the Mexican state is like not powerful enough to actually enforce order. And so what I'm arguing for is like for the state to in general have more power to enforce order. And I would say that that's a consistent principle both for Mexico and the US, where like the solution for the Mexican government, well, there's no like silver bullet, but like in general, the principle is they should get that under control. And the fact of the matter is that the like what's written in the law books is not a good indicator necessarily of what the actual state control is.
Okay, so what's written in the law books isn't a good indicator, but that's not the law books. That's literally where they keep their one gun store that's legally allowed to operate.
But you
And
would say
yet
that there's still
Mexico,
people who have guns in Mexico, right? Like a lot of guns are in
yes,
Mexico.
Mexico has 9.97 gun homicides per 100,000 people, and we have 2.97 gun homicides per 100,000 people.
And it's
And
because the United States is like effective at enforcing like policing and preventing cartels from developing in the United States. And the
but our geo
reason why the government in America is effective at this is because it has a very strong state, it has strong military, and it has strong police forces. And so what I'm arguing for is for those strong military police forces and law and order systems to be even stronger.
Okay, but our geopolitics, our geopolitical, uh, like our basically our geopolitical state in the United States of America is going to be extremely similar to Mexico. It's not
No,
going to be
it's
very
not.
far off. Geopolitical, yes. Geopolitically, it is, yes.
You mean like in regards to guns?
In regards to guns, geopolitically, it's going to be pretty much the same as Mexico.
Okay, walk me through that. How do you figure? In what ways?
States that states that have extremely difficult again, I'm not against gun regulation, but states that have extremely like stringent gun regulation, they they still have guns, they still have gun homicides. Chicago dealt with this for an extremely long time. They're still dealing with this. California is dealing with this. Like this isn't like uncommon. This happens. So I'm curious on how you think that like gun regulations hasn't necessarily worked thus far, but it's going to work now.
Have you ever heard the term grasping the nettle?
No, you go ahead, explain it to me then.
There's an old English phrase, and it comes from the idea that the nettle, which has a thorny stem, if you grasp it gently, the barbs on the stem, they pierce into your skin and it hurts, it stings you. But if
Yes.
you grasp strongly, you crush the needles and you're able to pick up the nettle. So the problem with gun regulation is if you have gun regulation in one city or state, but the state over does not have very effective gun regulation, your ability to actually control people's access to guns is very limited. And so, what I think the United States needs to do is grasp the nettle and prevent gun ownership in general. And there needs to be a coordinated effort across the states to do this. So, you can't just have like one state doing this, it has to be effective.
Okay. I mean, I'm just confused because California still has a gun violence problem. It's not like this is it's not like this is only towards the states that have or the states and the surrounding states that have less stringent gun laws. California still has a gun problem. Don't get it wrong. They have it better. Probably they have it not probably they have it better than a lot of other states. But I wouldn't necessarily say they don't have a gun violence problem.
Yeah, and I would say that's because in America, in general, it's easier to get guns than in other countries. And so the ability to transport guns to California for criminals is easy.
Okay, so is this like a I guess was this take a if it was my perfect world, if everything existed the way I wanted it to exist, that Americans should have no guns, or do you seriously think that you should be able that it's going to be able to be implemented and implemented to satisfaction?
I mean, I don't think that there's like the political will. Like Americans love their guns. I think that's problematic because guns allow people to amplify the level of force they inflict on other people. And so like I just like the arguments as far as like tyranny or like state like or the ability for individuals to create militias and etc are just like not persuasive to me. I don't think that
Not
there's like
persuasive?
yeah, I don't think there's any like persuasive reason why people should have access to guns.
I think there's a lot of persuasive reason why Americans should have access to guns. One is for sure self-defense. That's definitely a huge one to be able to defend yourself. And two is to defend your country. I 100% believe that. If you look back at tyrannical countries, the first thing they did was take the citizens' guns. Because I think it's quite known now that even though you may not have the same firepower, you can still effectively keep at least keep your ground against a government when you are not as uniform and is not like easy to guess who you are versus like if you have so basically two militaries that they're fighting, you can tell because they've got uniforms, they're very strategic, they're very uniformed. But if it when we're fighting against ISIS, they're not, they're very disorganized, but they're organized at the same time. And that's the way it would be, is it'd be like a disorganization, it would be an organized disorganization. And so it's been proven over and over again that citizens with guns with an organized disorganization can overthrow a tyrannical government. This has happened before in history multiple times.
I think that if you want to affect change or influence a tyrannical government, the best path to that is through the military. And so you can say that like armed resistance is effective, and that's true in that like you can use
Mhm.
armed resistance to achieve political ends. But a more important question is armed resistance more effective than unarmed resistance? And there's actually a lot of research into this. I believe it's Erica Chenoweth who has like a massive list of like various armed and unarmed resistances throughout history and how they've fared in achieving their political goals. And it turns out that when you have unarmed resistance, your ability to sway police officers and military officers onto your side is massively increased. And so I think that that should be like the aim of any sort of revolutionary goal or any sort of, desire to overthrow a tyrannical government, rather than like acting like the Taliban and going into the hills and like leading these armed resistances. Not to say that that's ineffective, but I think that if you want like true order and like long-term stability and control, it has to come through the military.
Do you think the military would actually follow orders saying to go take guns from citizens, and if they don't
If
give them to you, then just shoot on sight? Like, do you think military is really going to follow those orders? Because I highly
Yes,
doubt it.
yes, if people are actively shooting at the military, at the soldiers, at the army, if people have guns and they are waging war on the rest of America, then yeah, the military is going to be willing to come in and clear them out. But if you
You're
have
arguing that the
people,
military didn't like. You're arguing that half the military force didn't decide to disobey orders to begin with and join the quote unquote resistance at this point.
I think that if you want the military to join your side or to be cautious about using lethal force, then you have to not use lethal force against them to begin with, right? So that's kind of the distinction here. Is like I don't think that the US government is going to have an easy time getting the military to use lethal force on other Americans. I don't think that's true, but I think that it gets way easier if the Americans that they're asked to use lethal force on are actively willing and able and using lethal force against Americans in the first place.
They'd have to play puppet. The U.S. government would literally have to play puppet to try and put together a situation in which the United States military would decide to go against civilians. It's against the oath to begin with. It's against the oath you take as a soldier or an
No,
officer
no,
to
you're so
begin with.
wrong. Like police officers are
I'm not wrong.
expected
I've
all
taken
the
that oath.
time to take out individuals who are using lethal force against other Americans. You don't see police officers who are like, "Oh, I don't know if I should shoot this guy because he's an American." Like you shoot the guy to protect other Americans. And
You're right,
so,
but police isn't military. Military takes a different oath than the police
okay,
officers.
but you understand though, that like if there is military and there's a group of Americans who are terrorists who are acting to like kill other Americans, the military is going to be willing to stop those terrorists and that terrorist organization with lethal force. Like we agree on that, right?
If they're deemed as terrorists by the large majority of the military, sure.
Yes.
But
And how do
I
they
think
get deemed as terrorists?
you
If
would have a
they're
hard time doing that.
if they're
You would have a
using
hard
lethal
time doing
force
that.
against Americans. If they're
But
not doing that, they're not going to be deemed as terrorists.
you're right, but protecting your right to bear arms isn't going to be a reasonable way to tell the military, "Hey, look, we have domestic terrorists. Go take them out." Like that's not going to be a reasonable. That will get you nowhere.
I
It's not going
agree.
to be
Just
reasonable
having
whatsoever for the military
guns is not
forces.
going to like qualify you as a terrorist, right? Like
Right.
lots of Americans own guns. They're not terrorists, right? But if those Americans own the guns with the intention, plan to use them against the American government, that's what makes them terrorists.
So I mean, terrorism is a tricky thing. It's all about who wins. If the Americans would have lost the revolution, they would have been considered terrorists against the crown.
They
So
were
terrorism is all
terrorists
about
against the crown.
so
It's true.
terrorism is all about who wins. Who wins in the situation? They get to write the history books, and also they're not terrorists anymore. But it would be I find that it would be extremely hard, if not impossible, to convince the military that there are domestic terrorists. And again, we're trying to get all the guns out. No American can own a gun.
Mhm.
To then tell the military there's all these domestic terrorists with guns that are at home protecting their family, and we need you to go take their guns, and if they resist, then we're going to tell you go ahead and shoot on sight because they're a domestic terrorist.
Okay, maybe we should back up because maybe the conversation has gotten a little bit lost. Um, I don't think that if you told the US military that like gun owners were terrorists, that they would like automatically believe that and be willing to like break down doors and start shooting people to collect guns. That's to be clear, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if people are using guns to affect political change, they're using gun violence to do that, then I think that the military would reasonably see them as terrorists.
And why would they use gun violence to affect political change in this scenario?
Because you believe that that's one way to affect political change, right?
So it is one way, and I disagree with
Okay.
it for the large part. I think at a certain point, political violence does have its day and age to where it's useful. But and to the large part, I disagree with political violence. But at the same time, we're talking about taking away people's guns. Why would the gun owners get so mad and start using guns against the government to affect political change? What political change are we talking about here? We're talking about the government taking away their guns.
I think
Like it's always going to come back to that, and I think the military. I don't think the military's that dumb. I think they're going to see right through it and be like, no, it's their right to own a gun. I'm not going to just go and take it from them. Like
I think we have to
this seems a little
disambiguate because we've got
ridiculous.
like two scenarios going on here. We're like, one is how you enforce like taking away people's guns,
Mhm.
and two is like the use of guns to protect against government tyranny. So like,
Right.
let's imagine a scenario where the US government becomes like more and more tyrannical, right? And let's just say that
Mhm.
like hypothetically it's tyrannical in a way that's like very left wing. So like they're trying to enforce like radical socialist redistribution policies, right?
Okay.
And so there's a group of people in America who are right wingers. They have guns and they want to stand up to that tyrannical government, right? And they want to use their guns to stand up to that tyrannical government. And I'm saying if that group of right wingers is willing to use their guns to stand up to the tyrannical socialist US government, that the US military is going to be more willing to use lethal force against those rebels than if they were not, having guns and using guns to stand up to the government in the first place.
You would have to change the entirety of the U.S. Uh, you would have to change the entirety of the U.S. political mindset at that point in time, to even get there.
Yeah, we're just
You would have to change
imagining a
the entirety of the
hypothetical
Constitution.
scenario.
Okay, I'm about to say. Okay, so so I guess I was putting the two together because
Right, yeah.
when a government is going to come for your guns, the people who have guns are going to consider that to be tyrannical,
Hmm.
right? And so they're going to fight back against it because the government has become tyrannical. And so with that, the people who own guns and do support the Second Amendment are going to believe the government is tyrannical, and then and then the government in force is going to say, okay, so now they're domestic terrorists, military, we're going to need you to go take them out. I don't see it happening like that, and I'm curious as to like how you think that exactly would work, considering it was just a Second Amendment issue to where guns needed to be taken away 100%.
Yeah. So if, for example, I mean, I don't know, we're getting into these hypotheticals here, but like I'm trying to imagine a hypothetical where the government just says like take the guns, but they don't repeal the Second Amendment. So like I think we can imagine that kind of hypothetical where like the Second Amendment still exists, but the government is like acting in a way to get rid of guns anyways. And I think in that scenario, you the military is like going to be much less willing to go along with that, right?
Nonetheless, let's say the government just decides the Second Amendment doesn't exist anymore, because that's essentially what they've been
Like
doing if
through
they're saying take
voting
away everyone's
or
guns.
because
Huh?
like I think that if the US government, like the Congress, goes through the
Mhm.
proper procedures to like annul the Second Amendment, then I think that the military would not revolt if you are enforcing new gun laws.
I don't see any other way that the government would reverse the Second Amendment besides doing it through some kind of tyrannical means it was
Okay,
never
but we're
meant to do it
imagining
with.
hypotheticals here. Okay.
I
So
understand
we,
that.
we
So
got to
like,
play ball a little bit.
assume Congress and Senate went through the correct
Yeah.
procedures to get rid of the Second Amendment. I still think that gun owners would believe in the Second Amendment.
I
I
think so
still think
too.
that's the case.
God, we've gotten like so off track here. If the US government went through the proper channels to get rid of the Second Amendment,
Right. Yes.
do you?
Second Amendment no longer exists because
Yeah.
Congress, Senate, and President decided the Second Amendment no longer exists.
Yes.
Okay, so we're
And
there.
then they pass a law to
Right.
say, all right, we're going to restrict gun ownership. And so then they
Okay.
have police and they
Not just
are,
restrict, demolish
yeah,
because no
demolish gun
longer.
ownership,
Okay.
right? And so
Right.
police are like collecting guns, they're tracking guns, they're asking people to like turn in their guns. If people are found with guns, they're considered illegal, right? So let's say there's a group of people who dislike this, who have guns, and they're willing to stand up to the government through acts of gun violence. And then my question is the military going to be more or less willing to switch sides to the side of the gun owners if the gun owners are using violence or not using violence? And I would say that they're going to be less likely to, and this is like what the research says, is they're going to be less likely to switch sides to the gun owners if the gun owners are like, shooting people, or they're like taking over blocks of cities, right?
Right, but if they're not taking over blocks of cities,
So,
I guess this is my concern, right? If they're not
yeah,
taking over blocks of cities, and what they're doing is they are in their houses protecting themselves from federal officers. Let's call it the FBI right now, because we're leaving out the military because we don't know which way the military is going
protecting
to go.
themselves how, right? By shooting those officers.
Right, by shooting people who intrude in their house, trying to take away their
Yeah.
quote unquote Second Amendment because they still believe in it.
So let's say you're an FBI agent and your buddy or like someone you know in your department has like been shot and killed by someone who's like protecting their guns. Do you think that
Okay.
person is going to be like more or less empathetic to the people who have guns and are hanging on to them? Less empathetic is the answer.
Oh, they're gonna be less sympathetic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like using guns, and like again, I want to say that like you can use guns to affect political change. Like I wouldn't say that that's impossible. And that is like a way to do it. I would just say you need to compare it to something. And the thing that you compare it to is not using violence to affect political change. And when you don't use violence, you're more likely to get people on your side, which is really like what you want to have
Okay.
political power.
But at some point, there's going to have to be violence in this situation. There's going to have to be violence at some point in
Yes,
time.
yes, yes,
Because
yes.
okay, so like if violence, because I'm just trying to think through this. I'm like, there's not a possibility to where you take over a tyrannical government
Without
without
violence.
firing a single shot. Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah, so the point at which you engage in violence is when you have overwhelming force on your side. And the way to get overwhelming force on your side is to get the police and the military to switch to your side. So I think
Right.
that like once you do that, once the police and military are on your side, that's when you can start using violence. And so
Okay.
you have to like convince them first. And I would say that the way you convince them is through like peaceful demonstrations.
So how do you? I guess how do you negate all this and how do you negate all this and take the guns anyways to make America completely gunless?
I don't
How do
think
you
you
make America
can.
Australia?
Yeah, I don't think you can. So like this is like political fantasy land, right? Because the reality is
Right.
that like in America, the culture is such that people love guns. And so you're not going to be like able to easily take away guns. And I would say that like there's a counterfactual US where people don't love guns and where you can ban guns. And that counterfactual US is a better place to live.
Okay. So if you were elected to Congress, in the midterms, say you're running for the midterms and you were elected to Congress, is this something that you would actively push for, or is this just like this is my like daydream that America should be free of guns, or is this something that you would actually see as like worth actively pushing for?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's politically viable. I think like maybe another question would be like, say I'm like dictator of the US and like the police and military are like fully under my control. Would I get rid of guns? Yes. If I'm like a congressperson and I'm representing like Texas, no, because
You know
then
what? Say
it's
you're
like
the
political
president.
suicide.
Say you're the president. Say you are the most powerful person
Hmm.
in the world, most
Hmm.
powerful single person in the world. Would this be something that you would actively push for Congress and Senate to pass legislation to repeal the Second Amendment?
I guess so. I mean, like, I would say that, like, the best solution is to try to persuade people. So I would make, like, anti gun arguments to Congress members and to the American people. But, like, the way that our politics work, you need to have, like, a mass movement on your side in order to, like, effectively make change. So, like, I think that if I were to just persuade Congress members, and let's say that I'm, like, incredibly good at persuasion or whatever, and like I bring over like a significant enough number of Republicans that were able to repeal the Second Amendment, I think what would happen is that those Republicans would then lose office and I would lose office and we'd be replaced and you get the Second Amendment back. I think that'd be the realistic
I mean,
or probably not, but
we've
like
s-
you'd get the repealing of whatever legislation came after the Second Amendment.
so basically what would happen is there'd be another amendment, and that amendment would basically nullify the Second Amendment.
Mhm.
Same thing with the prohibition when they prohibited alcohol.
And then you'd need like
There was
another
there
law
was
to
a
actually ban
they
guns.
created another amendment to nullify the previous amendment. So that's essentially what that would be. Except it would be nullification of the Second Amendment and then a nullification of the Second Amendment, or not the Second Amendment, but whatever
Nullification of the
number that.
nullification.
Yeah, so it'd be a nullification of the nullification.
And I'm not
Uh,
sure if you could actually get the nullification, but you could probably repeal whatever laws come after the nullification.
I don't know, because we definitely nullified the prohibition, and I don't think alcohol is near as big in like American culture as guns are, and guns are huge in American culture. So I don't think I think you would still be able to get the nullification into the Constitution,
I
because you
think
can see the
alcohol
way
is bigger
Americans acted
in
afterwards.
America than guns. Because, like, with guns, there's a very significant portion of the population that is anti gun. There isn't as significant of a portion of the population that's anti alcohol.
So I don't know. I feel like the people that are pro guns are much more well, how do I say this? Much more gun ho about it than the people that are pro alcohol. And I guess, do you think like implementing these laws would prevent criminals from obtaining guns or breaking or like obtaining guns? Like we've implemented a lot of laws. Murder's illegal. There's a lot of things that are illegal. We've implemented a lot of laws. And criminals just seem to negate these laws, decide that they don't care. And so I guess what a part about this next law is going to like tell criminals like, oh no, you better not have that gun, because I don't see that ever happening to where it's like, oh no, you
Spartacus,
better not have that gun.
do you believe in having laws against murder?
Yes, I believe in having laws against murder,
Okay, why? Because you
because
believe it
I
reduces
view it.
murder, right?
Yeah, and I also view murder as immoral. Yes.
Okay. So that's the reason why you would ban guns, because you would reduce the number of guns.
Okay, but when you're reducing the number of guns, you're taking guns away from law-abiding citizens and leaving guns in the hands of criminals.
You're also taking them away from criminals, though.
Not the same extent as law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, almost by definition.
Almost by definition. So if every law-abiding citizen gets rid of their guns, you're going to tell me
Mhm.
there's going to be no guns on the criminal side.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying almost by definition, you would get rid of guns from law abiding citizens. And
Oh,
therefore, the
okay.
only people who would have guns are criminals.
Right.
And so I would say that, like, it's the job of the government. You can't remove all crime. Like, that will never happen. There will always be crime. But the job of the government is to reduce crime as low as possible.
But now you've left the Americans defenseless against the criminals that have guns,
No, because I think
the
it's
gun-bearing criminals.
I think you need a strong police system, right? So I don't think that like it should be the responsibility of individual citizens to feel like they need to always be protecting themselves. I think that that should be the government's responsibility to protect citizens. And so like the problem I live in a city, right? And the fact of the matter is that I cannot walk down any public road in my city at any time that I want to. And the reason for this isn't because the government is going to stop me. I'm not going to have a police officer say, hey, you can't be on this public road. But because I fear private tyranny, right? And so I think the
Yes.
solution to that is to have a more robust state that is able to police those areas and to crack down on criminality and to make them like free for people to walk down without needing to like carry guns for self-protection because they're afraid they're going to get into a firefight when they go downtown. I don't think that the solution is to like equip people for those firefights. The solution is to reduce the amount of crime.
So what about Uvalde? What about Parkland? Like these police departments fucked up royally.
Mhm.
And the Supreme Court has decided over, I think they decided 2 or 3 times that it's not the police duty, to protect citizens. They don't need to put themselves in harm's way to protect citizens. That's not their duty. And so to argue that the police are going to all of a sudden like start protecting citizens, when the only people that have guns are the criminals, police too, obviously, but the only citizens that have guns are the criminals. I think that police are going to be much more laid back. Like, yeah, we're definitely not going in now. I don't see the police attitude changing to be like, oh yeah, we're going to run towards the firefight now.
Yeah, I mean, so when you say that, like, it's not the job of police to protect people, what you mean is, like, it's not the job of police to get into firefights with people, right? Like, it's the job of the police to protect people by, like, apprehending the criminal when they can, but not to, like, get into a situation where people are spraying bullets everywhere. And so it is like ultimately the job of the police officers to protect people. The question is like a question of strategy and like how is the best way to protect people. And so I would lean on the side of saying that like you need to have police officers who are like have the training, the numbers, and the willingness to like protect people in general. But I don't think that necessarily you should have people like you should be telling police officers to like start getting into firefights. Like the solution is to like apprehend the criminals in whatever way yields the best results over the most number of cases and leads to like the greatest amount of justice. So like long term, the hope is that you consistently punish criminals who are engaging in violence.
hmm So do you think I guess do you think the Uvalde police did a good job in the Uvalde elementary school shooting?
I mean, clearly not. Yeah.
Okay, what about Parkland? Like, do you
I
think
don't know
Parkland
enough
did a good
about
job?
Parkland.
Uh, Parkland, let me just explain Parkland. Parkland, the police officers were outside for quite a bit. They didn't go inside. And the duty officer that was there did not call a code red. Did not call lockdown. He stayed outside the building the entire time as he knew the shooter was inside. And then they started watching the video cameras that were on a 20-minute delay, which allowed the Parkland shooter to be able to drop his gun in his vest like escape outside, pretending to be one of the students that were evacuating the building, and they didn't catch him for another hour or so. And he was when he was in a surrounding neighborhood, like next to the McDonald's. So like, do you think the Parkland police officers did a good job in that scenario?
It doesn't sound like they did.
Okay, so but these are things that actively happen when we have mass shootings, is that the police officers just seem to not do a very good job. Now I can tell you a recent mass shooting to where it was a very good job. The Greenwood Park mall shooting, very close to me. Elijah Dickens, he stopped that shooting within 15 seconds. Within 15 seconds, Elijah Dickens stopped the shooting. And that was and the I could be wrong about this because I'm trying to remember, but I believe the shooter had another 100 rounds and two other weapons in the bathroom as well.
Sproutacus.
Yes.
Do you think that police officers have the capability to stop shootings?
In certain scenarios, yes. In
Okay.
schools, yes, I believe that they do have the capability to stop shootings.
So
I think. Go ahead.
if for example, it was much harder for people to get access to guns, they had to go through more hoops to get them,
Mhm.
that process was more fraught with officers trying to prevent them. But when they do get them, if police officers were also more capable, for example, had like more funding, more training, more speciality, they would also probably be more able to stop shootings, right? So like that's what I'm arguing for ultimately is for the average person to have less ability to get guns and for police officers to have more ability to stop shooters.
Okay, so you're arguing for the police. So, do you not think it would be helpful to not necessarily helpful to like the police, but helpful to the entire society, for more people to be trained and to be armed. Do you not
No.
think because it's been shown there's been statistics to show that let me pull it up really quick that way I don't say it incorrectly. 1 second. That gun ownership deters crime. A study in applied economic letters found that assault weapons bans did not significantly affect murder rates at the state level, and states with restrictions on the carrying of concealed weapons had higher gun related murders. While gun ownership doubled in the 20th century, the murder rate decreased. States with the largest increases in gun ownership also have the largest drops in violent crimes. So, do you not think that gun ownership by itself deters crimes because of it might be dangerous to go shoot somebody now because oh I could get shot pretty easily because there's a very high gun ownership rate in this state and it be pretty likely that someone else there is going to have a gun.
I can't speak to the exact study, but I will say that I agree with the fundamental logic. So I think that like there's an incentive for me to get a gun because I will be safer with a gun, right? I think so. Like barring like mental health issues, but like for a lot of people, they can make themselves safer by owning guns. And so there's this kind of, I think it's this kind of like prisoner's dilemma where it makes sense for like all these individuals to own guns because it allows them to in some way stop crime or deter crime. But the thing is that that shouldn't be the responsibility of citizens. You shouldn't have a scenario where people feel the need to stop crime with guns. And by creating the scenario where everyone is pursuing armaments for themselves so they can protect themselves, you create a more dangerous society overall. So, like,
Okay.
imagine this, right? Like, imagine I've got someone who I'm worried about harming me. It makes sense for me to buy a gun to protect myself.
Right.
But now it makes sense for him to also buy a gun. And so now the level of lethality has just increased for both of us. And so now my neighbor sees that we both have guns. Now they're worried. So they also get a gun, right? And so each person is making a rational calculus of how to protect themselves. But overall, the end result is that in general, it becomes much, people have much more ability to inflict lethal damage to each other, and society has more danger as a result.
But the studies don't show that. It shows that it deters violent crime, murder rates. It go down significantly with the amount of gun ownership. It goes down quite significantly.
So,
Um, whereas you can't say the same about gun control laws. While I do believe in a certain amount of gun control, I do not believe that gun control by itself deters crime. I do believe that gun ownership will deter crime because greater than 95% of mass shootings happen in no gun zones.
so
And
the
people say it's like an anomaly and whatever, that they're just going to places they don't like. I think they're also depicting on where's the easiest, where am I not going to die, where am I not going to get shot before I'm able to accomplish whatever my goal is. And so that's why they're going to gun free zones. And if the entirety of America is a gun free zone, that's a scary thought.
yeah, so the reason why I don't want to like specifically get into the study is because I haven't read it. I'm
Okay.
saying that I agree with the logic, but what I would guess is that there's a lot of confounding variables with states and gun violence. So like what I'm guessing is you have areas like San Francisco or Detroit which experience a lot of violence, and yet these cities are like run by Democrats and probably like San Francisco, California has a lot of crazy restrictions on guns, right? They're very serious about this.
Yeah.
However, you go to somewhere like, um, like rural Nebraska or rural Oklahoma. This place is going to have a lot less violent crime in general. But it's not because Oklahoma like has guns that is preventing this necessarily. Oklahoma has less violence in general because of the social factors in Oklahoma. Like you have rural people who are living together and there's just less crime in general.
It's not proven though, because Britain got rid of guns for the large part.
Oh,
And
this is a great point because you can look at other countries, right, who
okay,
have less guns and they have less gun violence, right? And it's a better, well, it's better in some ways as a
the
comparison
Swedes.
because you're
Uh,
comparing like whole country to whole country. So you have like you have these urban areas and you have rural areas in Australia both, right? And overall,
right,
Australia is not like this crazy lawless area where you just have tons of violent crime. And neither is Britain.
right. Well, Britain does does have a lot of crime, and they have a lot of crime issues. Australia is
But they
geopolitically
have a
different
lot
than
less shootings, right?
Australia is geopolitically much different than the United States and or Great Britain.
Okay,
But
yeah, so
if you
someone
take a
just
look at
said in chat Shinzo Abe, which is like a perfect example because like Japan has like very, very little gun crime because they're, well, not because, but like they also have very heavy restrictions on guns. So like the rare instances of gun crime that you do have are with things like like homemade guns.
you do realize you're talking about islands, right? Right, both these places are islands.
That's true.
You can consider
Australia,
New Zealand in this as well.
Japan,
Like they're
and
both
Britain.
islands.
But you
No,
can
no.
go to continental Europe as well, and the
Right, right. But Britain, okay, we can call Britain an island, but there are definitely ways to smuggle things through. It much easier than you would in Japan or Australia. But with Great Britain, they're experiencing a lot of crime. They're experiencing a lot of terrorism, except it's just not with guns, it's with knives. And so they're thinking about banning knives. Like, how far do we have to go before we understand that we're just treating the symptoms here instead of actually treating the disease? Like how far do we have to go before we understand that and then actually treat the disease instead of the symptoms?
So the thing is that guns are, like I said earlier, a force multiplier. So I would rather have someone trying to commit crimes with guns than or with knives than with guns. Because the ability to kill people with a gun is more than the ability to kill people with a knife. It's the old saying, like, don't bring a knife to a gunfight because it's not going to be advantageous for you. Why? Because guns are more effective at killing than knives are.
Uh, Give me 1 second. I'm looking something up. Let's see. So are you not? But I guess are you not saying that it's not an issue when it's with knives? Because you can look at Swedes, and Swedes have millions. I mean, millions of guns. But have barely any gun deaths. Like I don't see the issue with guns because Britain got rid of guns. That should have fixed the problem. But Swedes have millions of guns, and somehow that did fix the problem.
I don't think
Britain's now
that
having
getting rid
Britain's
of
now having a
guns
problem
is
with
the only
knives.
way to reduce crime. So, like, if you have more police officers, that'll also reduce crime overall, right? So, crime is like a very multi-variable factor. And if you have, like, if you in general have, like, less poverty, you're also going to have less crime. And it's a very complicated relationship. But there are lots of ways to reduce crime. One of them, and to reduce gun crime specifically, one of them is to reduce access to guns. So I'm not saying that like we shouldn't pursue other avenues as well. And other avenues might be like easier to pursue for the US, which has a big gun culture. But I think that if we imagine like a better, all else equal, if you get rid of guns, if you just imagine a world without them, or imagine a United States where people have less access to guns, you're going to have less gun crime.
What if we taught gun safety as a required course in schools? What if we actually took a look at mental health in the United States and actually tried to address that issue? Because there is a correlation between being in the lower class and having mental health issues that aren't being actively treated or haven't ever been actively treated. And so with that being said, I think that's the disease. Like I think that's the disease. The symptoms are going to be violence. It's clear that if you are mentally ill and you are also lower class, the symptom of that is very likely to be violent. But at the same time, why don't we address the mental illness? Why don't we address the classism that's currently happening? Instead of addressing the gun argument, because Swedes, the mental illness in Switzerland went up, I believe, but that was only because it was reported. We have a lot of unreported mental illness in the United States, and I would like to see our numbers go up because that means it's being reported. That means it's being treated. And obviously, it's had a very good effect with Switzerland.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of like the libertarian, or like this is my argument against libertarianism, is that libertarianism works in areas where you already have a high degree of like order and in general peace and cooperation and high social trust. So like if you have a community where everyone is like very well socialized and there's very little poverty, there's very little mental illness, people are doing really well, that community I think can have access to guns and it would be totally fine, right? And so I think like in general that community could have way less laws and they'd be totally fine. So because they don't need the laws to like control behavior. And so I think it's in those environments where you have like libertarian policies which really work because they just don't need like the state to come in and control things. But then you go to like an area like Afghanistan, right? And in Afghanistan, if you allow people to like do whatever, you have the Taliban that's going to like take advantage of that power vacuum and take control of the country and engage in terrorism and whatnot. And so I think what that tells you is that in order to have an environment where it's safe to allow people access to weapons or to relax laws in general, you have to already have a very ordered system. And so the thing about the United States is that we don't have a highly ordered system. We do have a lot of mental illness. We do have a lot of issues which are prone to worsen crime. And so I think that in that environment, it doesn't make sense to allow people to have guns. And maybe in the future, like if we get to a place in American culture where mental illness is at all-time lows and in general there's a lot of social cooperation and social harmony, then I think you can allow people access to guns.
If you're worried about that, why not put a psych eval in the process of getting a gun? So basically, when you go to do your background check, it may, or when you go to get like a firearms owner ID, which I think Illinois has, put a psych eval as part of the process of getting a firearms owner ID, that basically says I'm cleared to own a firearm, and then just combine that with a concealed carry permit, which works much better than open carry. There's stats on that too. The concealed carry is much better than open carry. But yeah, combine that with a concealed carry permit, make it shall issue. So if you pass the background check, if you pass the psych eval, then you get your firearms owner ID and a concealed carry permit at the same time, and it should be at no cost to you, since it is a negative right, and the government must protect your right for that to happen.
I mean, I think that like if you install restrictions on guns that make it harder for the wrong people to get guns, I think that's an improvement, right? So I'm not going to say that's a bad policy. I'd prefer that to no restrictions. But in general, my position is that more restrictions is going to be better.
Okay, I don't disagree that we can have a good. I don't disagree we could have good gun restrictions. I've argued for certain gun restrictions. I've also argued for certain things to be unrestricted, or not unrestricted, less restricted, like the NFA items, the National Firearms Act items. So that includes machine guns like short-barreled rifles, sawed-off shotguns, items such as those. I think it's extremely classist because those things are still available to purchase. You just need to be able to pay the amount of money. I can pass the background check, but I can't afford the tax stamp that comes with buying a short-barreled rifle. So with all that being said, like it's classist. So someone, if I was of a higher class, because I can pass that background check and I could afford the tax stamp, then now I can own this. But because can't afford that tax stamp, I can't own it now. So like there's extremely classist policies within
Well,
gun control that
good.
need to go away.
Good, because rich people are less likely to engage in violent crime. So like if you create like financial barriers to gun ownership, that's going to prevent people who are more likely to engage in violent crime for lack of like economic opportunity from getting access to these powerful force multipliers.
So you think gun control should be classist to like the extremes?
I mean, ideally, I think it should be like restricted to everybody, but like if there are financial barriers, that's going to like screen out people who are more likely to engage in violent crime.
Well, there's
Like if
already
the
financial
like for
barriers.
example,
The,
like
the the better weapon system you want, the more you have to pay for it. Regardless, the government is implying an extra tax, saying that if you want this item, then you're going to need to pay me more, which is on its face classist.
yeah, if you make it so that like only millionaires can own guns, it's a very small percent of the population, and millionaires tend to not go on shooting sprees. So that would be okay.
Until until the millionaires get robbed. Anyways, I think this has been a good conversation, Taptage. Like I hope we can continue it at some point in time. I might send you some studies.
Do you
I
appreciate me just
I would
biting
appreciate.
bullets?
No, you're good. You don't need to bite any bullets. So I would appreciate if you sent me studies as well, and maybe we could readdress the topic at like a later time. If you have studies that prove like what you've been saying, and I will gather the studies that I've been mentioning. That way you get the chance to read them before going on stream, just to make it a little bit more fair. We both read each other's materials, and that we can come at it more through like an intellectual point of view. I think that would be awesome. But other than that, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Radicus. It was fun.
Not a problem.
Listen, that was fun. I feel like I was a little bit scuffed in that, which is funny. I think that okay, shaved dog's arse. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do Collins. Um I'll be back. I'm gonna get water and then I'll return. Okay. I love you all. Returned. All right. We're gonna do Collins. All right, that's the Discord invite. You can join it. There's a voice channel for stream. There's a waiting room channel. I think someone already asked to join, so I'm going to let them join. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going? What do you want to talk about?
I saw you talking about gun control.
Yes.
And that's a topic that I have spent a large portion of my life on.
Okay. What do you have to say?
I'm actually more just explicitly curious, what are your concerns surrounding firearms specifically in the United States or in... Sorry, I'm recovering from COVID, so I got a little bit of that congestion. But more of like, what are your policy prescriptions for the United States? And like, What kind of policy prescriptions are you pushing for or interested in surrounding the topic of firearms in the United States?
Um, I'd have to think about it more. I think it's one thing to have a sort of philosophical argument of like things would be better if you could restrict guns. But like another question of like what is the best strategy for doing that? And I'm not sure what the best strategy is. And in fact, I think that like it's very hard to craft an effective one, just because of the political and cultural landscape of the United States, where really what you need is like buy-in from people. And I don't really think you have buy-in for like effective national gun control. So if there's like a good way to effectively implement gun control on the national level, I don't know it. But maybe you have one. You have an idea.
I have some ideas, but
Hmm.
what is your goal with gun control? Because right now there seems to be no clear goal of the primary advocates of gun control other than just banning things that look and sound scary and don't have any meaningful effect on actual firearms deaths in the United States.
Well, I think most firearm deaths in the United States are from handguns, right? So I think that would be like the major target.
And the overwhelming majority are suicides.
Yeah, which is yeah. I mean, like that's sort of tragic, but you're not going to really like people are going to find other ways to commit suicide. So like
I agree.
if you're reducing gun deaths from suicide, it is really just like a reducing of deaths on paper. So like what you're really able to
Okay,
reduce
hold on.
is
I have someone screaming at me.
okay.
I have a homeless bum that lives with me, and she can't open doors, so she
Unbelievable.
screams.
I bet she's furry too. Disgusting.
Yeah, and she poops in a box.
Ugh.
Okay, she's gone. I'm sorry. Continue.
Okay, yeah. So like really what you'd be targeting is like murder deaths.
Okay, so what is your and you're accurate with your description of firearms deaths in the United States. If we exclude the 40,000 deaths due to suicide, we have around 10 to 11,000 deaths a year due to homicide or non-suicide related deaths. That includes accidentals and intentional homicide, unintentional homicide,
A toddler
justified.
gets a hand of a
Mhm.
gun. Yeah, that kind of thing.
It includes all other deaths besides suicides. That number is around 11,000. And around 9,000 of those, around 90%, are gang related violence committed with handguns. And then the last 1%, the last about 1,000 deaths are accidentals, justified homicides, and everything else.
So what is the question exactly?
I asked you about your policy prescriptions, and then we went to it's easier to have a philosophical discussion about it rather than have a policy one. And I believe you asked me what my policy prescriptions were.
Yes.
So my policy prescriptions have nothing to do with firearms at all, actually, for the most part. My number one priority with reducing firearm deaths in the United States is focusing on those 9,000 gang-related murders. I very much care about the 40,000 deaths due to suicide. I have some very close friends I've lost due to what I would call disease. And I know people closely who struggle with that suicidality and indication, and they've had to give up their guns to their family members before. It can get scary. But in any case, my policy prescription focuses mainly around ending the drug war and removing the mainstream of income and the promotion of violent crime families outside of what we would consider justified, like the United States government. Like people controlling a substance as a source of income that perpetuates violence. Right, a little bit like the Nancy Reagan "blood is on your hands" thing, but more close to home. So, like, I want to decriminalize and legalize substances in the United States to reduce firearms violence.
Interesting.
And then I think policy position 2 is to give and take. In the United States, as you described, it's not very politically efficacious to say, I want to take your guns away. It basically killed Beto O'Rourke's campaign in Texas when he said, yes, I'm going to take your AK-47. Yes, I'm going to take your AR-15. And there's not anything you're going to do about it. That's not very popular. Whenever Pew does its research polls every 5 or 10 years on firearms, it flip-flops back and forth. And it really just depends on what the media was talking about, whether or not there was a recent shooting. You either get like 52% of Americans support gun control or 48% of Americans support gun control. It just teeters right in that center stuff back and forth. And a lot of it is because while the media messaging is very strong in gun control advocacy, the data doesn't actually support either side very much. I don't know if you've ever, not to mention our unholy sepulcher, but if you've ever heard Destiny talk guns, he kind of strays away from the topic because he likes guns, and the studies show that it makes people feel safe. But whether it's actually safer is up for debate.
Right. It's very hard to prove that. Yeah, I mean, that's true of like a lot of sociological literature, just because you can't really get like good control studies on it.
Those are my major, like, if you, in the United States, if you want to, sorry, I haven't even gotten to the second one. I just started rambling. Sorry. The second one is to take the money that you would save from ending the drug war, kicking down doors in a poor black neighborhood to confiscate two ounces of crack isn't going to do very much to actually reduce crime. Take all the money you're saving from not enforcing drug laws, as well as the money you're now generating from the sale of legal substances to recreational users to fund some kind of mental and physical health treatment for poor and impoverished people, as well as, have you ever heard the phrase community tested initiative?
I haven't.
It's not super well known. It's not an official codified phrase, but it's a specific designation used by think tanks and like more conservative research foundations. But it essentially means like an effective charity, a charity that has proven to be able to take a sum of money and return the result that they have promised. In the terms of community tested initiatives, that means reducing criminality in an area, or specifically removing how many actors you can remove from a criminalized area.
So you would fund those.
You would work to identify them, find these community, like, you don't just want to walk into a community and drop a bunch of money on them and give them a big administration to fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
They need to have that buy-in that you're talking about. They need to say, hey, this guy grew up here and he started this little food, like all he was doing was making beef stew and canning it and giving it away to people. And now we're going to expand that to, we're going to give him a little community center for $500,000 and give him some internet access, some computers, maybe a small kitchen, whatever,
It's also a proven track record, right? Like, you see what's working in the community.
They already do this. These foundations have lists of like proven, tested initiatives that have taken someone from a poor and impoverished area and either moved them out of it or improved their situation enough to where they're stable and can contribute to their community. It would be eliminate the drug war, then take that money and fund social services. And I think that's the give and take that you might get from the other side of Republicans or individuals that advocate for more gun rights like myself, is that if you say, hey, we really, really need that healthcare, but we also want to take your guns, or we want to control your guns. What if we bump the brakes on the gun control, or even go so far as to, as Sproutic has mentioned, modify the terms of the National Firearms Act to allow individuals to have suppressors and short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns and things like that. Things that the rules and laws around in the United States are a little funky. Like in European states, suppressors are seen as safety devices. They're to protect your hearing as you're shooting. They don't make the gun deadly silent. You're not solid snake sneaking around.
It's not a video game, yeah.
They're safety devices. So things like that, you can be like, dangle that, hey, you want your suppressor without having to pay a $200 tax stamp and have the ATF come put a camera up your asshole? Well, then you got to give us a little health care.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I think the big problem is that drugs can be like very predatory, and like the drug industry can be very predatory.
Mhm.
And there's, we see this on a much lower level, a much lower scale with like sugar or other like sort of addictive substances, where you can have these companies that really benefit from getting people like hooked on things, and ultimately it's very detrimental to their health and their community. So I think like the worry is, if we are relaxing laws regarding controlled substances, how do we not also end up with more addicts?
That's where the funding healthcare comes in. If you legalize drugs and don't change your healthcare system to accommodate how you treat drug addicts, you're going to fail completely and you're going to kill everybody.
So on balance, do you think by legalizing or by
decriminalizing
yeah.
first, you can never jump straight to legalization. You have to have that little gray area period, at least for a year, in my opinion. You need
ending the sort of
that's so you can collect
control.
That's so you can collect data, you can see the public response, and you can then craft policy surrounding what your state, community, blah 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 needs.
Yeah, so on balance, if you're decriminalizing these controlled substances, how do you make sure, or I guess like, how can you be sure that you're going to have a better situation on the other end of that, where you have ideally less numbers of people who are addicted to drugs, or at the very least, you are reducing crime enough that even if you have like a few more people who are struggling with drugs, on balance, you have less suffering in the world? How do you ensure that?
Well, first off, you're flat out reducing crime instantly by decriminalizing substances or legalizing them, right?
Yeah.
When you make something no longer illegal, very obvious. If I were to legalize crack tomorrow, everybody who smokes crack is no longer a criminal and is no longer part of the.
But you understand what I mean, like gun crime, which is how the conversation started.
Yeah. So, well, I guess. We've shifted a little bit now to the discussion of.
Well, you brought up so just like go backwards
because none of the actual none of the policy prescriptions that to me will seem to have a very real effect in reducing. I don't know if anybody's yelling at me into a shed. I decided to make sure to not have it on.
I think you're doing good. I think they love you.
Oh, cool. Well, I just think that. I've derailed myself because I got embarrassed.
Well, just for context, we are talking about gun control. And you mentioned if we end the war on drugs, if we take these steps to decriminalize, we can take away a lot of the funding sources for criminal enterprises.
Organized crime.
Yeah. And therefore reduce both like the need for this like gang violence and also like the ability to fund gang violence. And then
you again, that's not decriminalization and legalization of substances, like you said. Just like any other policy is going to have massive unintended consequences. I think you can just sign it away, which is why I this is a much longer form discussion than firearms policy at this point, because I'm not interested in any new gun control. I think actually gun control laws in the United States. I know this is the point where people will vehemently disagree. Is that I believe firearm laws are pretty fine. The problem is enforcement. But in any case, just to end the drug war legalization kind of, there are many countries around the world like Portugal and I think Ecuador, I have to look it up, that have had successful instances of decriminalizing substances but it came with a healthcare component. Whenever you're decriminalizing a substance, you're attempting to change the public perception of drug use from being a criminal issue to a mental health issue. These are not individuals who are down, dingy, dirty criminals who are going to smoke meth and break into your home. This is the dude who in 1987 had a single less than 1 gram joint in his pickup truck, and now he has a life sentence.
So, how do you feel about the argument that the effectiveness of banning or decriminalizing certain materials really depends on the specific community and context? So, like, I grew up really close to a Native American reservation, and I've spoken with like a lot of people from these communities, and like I've had people say things that like where they're saying like we really need to crack down on alcohol use, and I've had people make the argument that like we need to ban alcohol use in this community, and their position is basically that like they don't feel like they can trust people to self-regulate, and so their goal would be to like ban alcohol use and then use like improvements in less addiction, less use of alcohol to then move towards better things. And as the community improves, then you can like loosen up on those restrictions and you can trust people to not abuse the substances. So basically what I'm saying is that like in communities where like you don't have a lot of mental health issues, where you have like good socioeconomic status, where people are like not going to be as likely to abuse substances in general, in those communities you can trust people to self-regulate. But in communities where you do have a lot of issues, your ability to trust people to self-regulate is much less confident. How do you feel about that argument?
Well, I'm a big rights and freedom guy. I try and stave as far away as possible from that label anarcho-capitalist. I like to phrase myself in the terms of the market anarchist. I want to be able to choose where I live, and
Yeah.
I don't want Ancapistan. I don't want to argue about who's my Bezos buck daddy, blah blah blah. So I am very much interested in maximizing freedom for individuals and allowing them to make choices. I think that if a community like the American Indians or the American natives, Native Americans, however, I find that American natives are First Nation peoples are a little less lax or a little more lax with how.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people said Indian, like where I grew up. I just like white people don't say that, but like everyone that I knew like used that word. So like on Twitch, I'll say like Native Americans and Indigenous Americans.
I don't know why. I like the First Nation phrase. I
think it's popular in Canada for sure. That's what they use.
I think that they have the what am I gonna? I don't think they should. I think that it depends highly on what they're like, how they're penalizing it. Like,
you don't think that they should ban alcohol? Is what you're saying?
I think they can, but the problem is, how do you ban it? Are you just banning the sale, or are you banning consumption as well? Like, can I go off the reservation? Sure. Yeah, because like if you ban consumption as well, you're just locking up people for doing drugs. And then now they have a criminal record, and now they think that they can't get another job. They hate themselves. They think that they're just as bad as the other people who are in jail.
The other thing is that if you ban sale in these areas, you have this in some places where like you will ban sale on the reservation, and then everyone just goes to the town over, and then the town over has like these booming like alcohol industries, and you have
there's still dry counties here in Texas.
Yeah.
So there's still sundown towns in Texas, by the way. But I mean, that's definitely an issue as well. I just don't think that it's the fault of the surrounding communities that community can't effectively control their borders and enforce their laws. Like, if you're going to pass a certain set of laws and regulations, but then don't have the ability to enforce those laws and regulations, you basically aren't in any
Yeah.
reasonable way an effective government. You know, I can sit here in Texas and declare Pretoria's independence and write my own laws and constitution about how I'm going to fuck every federal agent that steps on my land. But if they step on my land and say do shit, pussy, and I don't do anything, then how effective is Pretoria?
Yeah, you're not actually sovereign.
Yeah.
Until you're sovereign.
So that's what I think, is that if they want to ban alcohol, they can. But if they're totally unable to enforce this kind of thing, then I think that there's better policy options, such as discovering why alcohol is such an issue. A lot of it is psychology is a very weird animal, and people abuse it way too much. And I don't know much about the psychology behind generational trauma, but like or exactly what stories are told within the First Nation people's communities about where they came from and how they fell or were destroyed and controlled. You know, I get some education from the Texas government, but it's not known to be the most accurate.
So I guess like I think the fundamental question is a question of like sequence. So like if you're going to decriminalize drugs, I think you could reasonably make the argument that like in order to start that process, it actually begins with like decreasing the reasons why people go to drugs in the first place.
Yeah.
So like we look at these communities that are reservations and Native Americans are living in these areas, and there's a lot of like homelessness and mental health issues and a lot of poverty. And so people end up turning to drugs and alcohol. And so I think that like we can imagine a world where these, you know, tribal governments are able to effectively ban alcohol. So like they, you know, this isn't the world we exist in.
I think
like,
they have. That's something.
A lot of them have, yeah. But like it does create these situations where you have like neighboring towns where people just go to for their alcohol. But like let's say that like they are able to effectively ban alcohol use, and so people aren't going to like neighboring towns. So they do that, and then I think that like before they can think about unbanning alcohol, they might first want to address the reasons why people are using alcohol in the first place. And so I think that might be like a reasonable middle ground, is to say that like when you have drug use, it does make sense to ban it, at least for some period of time, but then work towards eventually having a community where you don't need to ban it and where you can decriminalize things and trust people to self-regulate.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that this works well for the description of substances and drugs and alcohol, but
also guns.
I don't think it translates well to firearms.
Wait, really? Okay. Because I would say that like ideally you would work towards a system and a community where you can trust people with guns. I would say that's like the ideal. But I think that it makes sense to ban guns until you get to that point. And then even when you do get to that point, you should like regulate it so you're not seeing guns like move from communities where they can be trusted to like communities where they can't be trusted.
I imagine this would really resonate me if I grew up in a community that wasn't secure and safe. I think the problem is I have been surrounded by firearms my entire life, even in unsafe communities. Like when I've gone to visit, I bring my own firearm and they have their own. We know about it, but we don't talk about it, kind of thing. And we're both carrying for different reasons, for different fears. Like I might have a more genuine fear of getting shot, whereas there's actually significant cultural aspects of owning a firearm in these communities that have gang culture that don't result in violence, but are still related to it. I've actually been lacked in Houston. Like driving around Houston, I've had people just point their guns at me,
Whoa.
and then you just have to like raise your gun up, and they put their gun down, and they're like, "Yeah, you ain't like it." Shit like it's stupid.
Wild.
Yeah. I think this is like the Ben Carson, at least in the conservative world, this was Ben Carson's issue. He grew up in inner city, poor America, and the reason that the Republican Party distanced himself from him so quickly was his comments on well, a couple other comments as well, but his comments on wanting like inner city communities to be able to like crack down
On
uh,
guns.
on guns and violent crime. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's what I would say is that like you have areas that are like very prone to violence for a lot of reasons, and so I think that these areas, when you have guns in them, they're much more likely to be used for like gang violence than if you have guns in like a tiny rural Colorado town where there's like almost no crime in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like it makes more sense to crack down on guns in one area than the other. The problem is that like if you don't consistently have rules, you might just see guns like moving from place to place.
We're going to touch on this in a second because
Okay.
it's really this is a lot. I'm getting a little excited because I feel like I have an in with you now on this. I've got an idea seeding itself in my brain. It's not. I'm not trying to be insidious, but I'm just like trying to hold back a little bit. So
That makes me very curious.
I know.
It sounds like you've got like a silver bullet that's going to change my mind.
No. It's not a silver bullet. There's never a silver bullet in a discussion. I feel like we've traded pretty effectively so far in our discussions, and we've come to some mutual agreements and some like pretty important points. But like, there's like this little thread of now we're on the gun. We're talking about the thing now. When it comes to this idea of enforcing laws on certain communities, those laws are going to have the overwhelming support of that community. Otherwise, it's going to look like a bunch of white cops going into a black neighborhood to confiscate firearms. That's what it looks like.
But like in a lot of like if we're talking about like racial communities in the US, like you go to these communities and you do find that like no one likes crime and like no one wants to be terrorized by guns. And so like a lot of black people are very interested in cracking down on gun ownership.
Yeah. But I don't know if they want, the city of Chicago to hire a bunch of cops from northern Chicago suburbs to go and kick down doors and confiscate weapons door by door.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you have to do it tactfully.
I think we already have a huge issue in the United States of poor inner city communities having to hire cops from other towns, and all of the tax money that is supposed to be going to investment and improvement of the roads and infrastructure and like general health and welfare of the people in those communities is now being siphoned out to enforce laws that, while they want, is not being effectively enforced effectively in their communities. Specifically here in Texas, the fact that I can open carry a firearm today is only because of us repealing intentionally racist laws. Like the whole reason why you could not open carry a handgun in Texas in any legal manner for the past 100 years plus, up until about 2 years ago, was specifically to prevent newly freed slaves from carrying firearms openly. They didn't have anywhere to store them or like had to keep them on their body. So there's just it's very hard to get this idea, or like to present this idea of we need certain areas to have certain gun laws as well as like enforce them, but there's no
reasonable means of enforcing that without some really bad optics.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that like part of the problem here is that enforcing
Because
the law.
I agree with you on this, is that these communities, like I know Destiny brings up as well, is that black and Latino communities are like a lot more conservative than we give them credit for, and have a lot stronger positions than what your average white liberal might present.
Yeah, because like if you're a white suburbanite who like doesn't deal with crime, of course crime doesn't feel like a big problem to you. Like in your community, you legitimately don't need a lot of cops. So like you don't
I
need
haven't
to
seen
like
a cop
fund
in
it.
months.
Yeah, but like you go to these areas and like my girlfriend lived in an area that was like dealt with a lot of crime, and she had like a bullet like fly through her apartment window. And like you get a sense talking to people that like there's a real fear of the consequences of dealing with that crime. And these people like they're not like, oh, just like we don't need cops. Like there is a real need for this. So I think that one of the problems here is that when you have a lot of crime, for example, this can be like anything, but like you have high levels of shoplifting in an area.
Yep.
And that reduces like the margins these businesses have. And so you have businesses closed down. And then you have less employers in the area. So it's
Less
harder to get
employees,
jobs.
less
And-
tax revenue.
Exactly. Like schools have less money for people. And so it's this reinforcing
Property
cycle.
values drop.
Exactly. And so now you have people who are, because they don't have a lot of opportunities, they're more likely to engage in crime in the first place. And so like it feeds into themselves. And like you need to put a stop somewhere in this cycle. And like one of the ways to do that is to just like crack down on crime. And then you move from there.
I think cracking down on crime is a stopgap solution.
What do you mean by that?
How familiar are you with the world of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Not very familiar.
I'd recommend going to, I mean, just because it's good to just go into these meetings every once in a while. It's always good to be familiar with things, especially ones that have helped a lot of people. I've been in recovery spaces a lot, and like have been to what you would call rehab twice. Not for anything serious or drug related, but not like, I don't identify as an addict. I'm not like shooting up heroin or smoking crack and doing meth. I've done meth before. I have done the methstiny meme.
Okay.
But in any case, one of the big things to discuss, and similar to what you're talking about, is that there's the free fall at the end of this cycle of violence. Is that the perfect storm of businesses closing and people getting fired and property values dropping and schools becoming untenable or even completely unusable due to lack of resources and having to close, and the devastating effect that this can have on communities, as something that has to be arrested and identified and arrested. So when you're doing drugs and you're shooting up heroin before you go and drop your daughter off at school, that's the free fall. You're like doing everything bad. You would never thought you'd get to the point of shooting up heroin before you go take your daughter to school. And now you drop her off and then you crash your car into a stop sign on the way home, and now you're in jail. That could be your rock bottom. And then you meet some guy in jail and he says, you show me rock bottom and I'll show you the shovel. I think it can always get worse. And I think that I can't think of any examples of a community falling that far, though. Can you? I mean,
What do you mean?
Like to total lawlessness.
I don't think so necessarily either.
Yeah.
At least not in the U.S.
Yeah,
I know that in other countries, like Mexico
sure.
got brought up with Spartacus earlier, where there's like a lot of problems with that. But yeah,
have you seen videos of the Jalisco cartel?
I have not. I'm sure they're
the second largest. They're the ones that it's basically a bunch of oil billionaires who have bought out the cartel, and they buy them like nice armored vehicles and everything, but they're really shittily trained, so the Citadelians still stomp them.
Wild. Yeah, but no, I think that like you have these cycles of violence and crime in the United States, and you need to throw a wrench in that cycle somehow. Because if you have the cycle that's continuing, like you're just going to have these like spiraling issues. And so one of the ways, and this is like what prompted your response. So like I'm still curious about how you said it was just like a stopgap solution, which maybe we agree on, but I think that like you need to stop the cycle somehow. And one of the ways to stop that cycle is to really get serious about reducing crime. When you really get serious about reducing crime, you make it easier for businesses to like come back into these environments. You make it easier for people to like start businesses. You start bringing back economic opportunity. And then I think you can relax with, you know, trying to prevent crime.
So I'm trying to think of I'm a very bad student, but I am one of those people that just sat at home and absorbed stuff online, read the wiki pages, and found whatever is interesting. But and I'm a college dropout now again. But I think my most recent criminology and it was part of psychology that I was doing, criminology and criminal justice I was doing. There's like 4 or 5 different methods of policing. Are you familiar with these?
I don't know. I'm not familiar.
There's like broken windows policing, or I can't remember all the time. The thing that comes to mind is broken windows, which
I
is
have
like
heard of that.
enforcement of the visible signs of crime.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to suppress the visible aspects of crime, like broken windows or crack pipes on the street, heroin needles in the grass, homeless people in tents, things like that. But each one of these has like its own course. Like we have case studies of, okay, this is how this was done, and this was the like response and stuff. And like a lot of what you're saying reminds me of broken windows policing, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It's just that like I think that the main I'll give you my third policy. Let's go back to guns. We've got that and this one will actually be gun related. We need to enforce the regulations on the books. I don't care. I would love to sit here and go like full gun tard and jerk my cock about wanting to disband the ATF and like how I want like I don't like. Are you a fan, a hater of the ATF? Do you know why people are so enraged at this
Because yeah, I know. I've heard like the memes where people like talk shit about ATF.
Waco, Ruby Ridge, shoot your dog, shoot your wife in the head while she's carrying your newborn child, shoot your son. Like the ATF has a bad track record of killing American citizens, for little to no reason. Like I'm not going to sit here and defend David Koresh, but I also didn't want 70 children and men, women, and children burned alive because of one crazy person. I'm gonna avoid whatever I was just about to talk about. The third position is enforcing the laws on the books. There's not a lot of data on this, but from what we can gather, the majority of illicit firearm sales are not coming from smuggled weapons in Mexico. They're not coming from private sales at gun shows. They're not coming from sales from family members. They're almost 100% exclusively either being stolen from private households or stolen from gun stores, or even worse, which I'm pretty sure this number is a lot higher than anybody is willing to admit, federal firearms license dealers who go uninspected for decades selling guns out the back of their store to people who buy to gang members in bulk quantities. I think in the past like 25 years, the ATF has inspected less than 27% or like less than 30% of all gun stores in the United States. There are some gun stores who haven't had an inventory check or like a combing of their records as they're federally required to like maintain in decades. And there's just vast swaths of guns that go missing every year from gun store inventory. So I don't know if that means getting rid of the ATF and giving their funding and resources to the FBI to enforce these laws, or and this would really piss a lot of people off, giving more money to the ATF. But you got it, if
You need to fix like how you're policing these things, because it sounds like it's just not being done effectively at the moment.
it really isn't. There's just so much lack of competence at the federal level on firearms, and if anything, it would be better to try and lobby states to increase like firearms enforcement. Just because it's such a mess at the federal level.
That's a really interesting insight, that perhaps like the best path forward, at least for the time being, is like not more legislation, but just like enforcement of existing legislation. You could really you could reduce the amount of gun violence that we do have by making sure that the laws are working as intended.
You should look up some gun memes sometime, or go on. You may not like this, and I wouldn't ever recommend anybody try and navigate 4chan on their own. But the 4chan's weapons board is a good place to like
The
get a
K.
little K. Yeah, as long as you ignore the poltards, as we call them. I'm not an active user of 4chan anymore, but it's just like, if you want a good snapshot of the unregulated internet and what memes they're talking about, go to 4chan. But anyway, the memes in the gun community around laws in the United States are that like people really don't understand that in the United States, gun laws are actually a lot stricter than you think. Where are you from? Are you in the U.S., Toph?
I am.
Or are you
Yeah.
in Canada? Okay. So in the United States, the only way to get a firearm shipped to your door is to have a federal firearms license or a special occupation tax. And those are both very expensive and extensive processes to get approved. Whereas in Canada, if you want a firearm shipped to your door, you just have to get your firearms license, and then you can do anything you want. You can get your AR-15 semi-automatic mag-capped shipped straight to your door. Whereas in the United States, if you want to buy a firearm, you need your ID. You have to go into a gun shop, and typically an NICS takes about an hour. If it takes longer than 3.5 hours, you're legally allowed to leave with the firearm. So that's another thing. That's another thing. In the United States, if you can't get your background check in time, you're legally allowed to leave with your firearm. Now, if the background check comes up negative, hopefully the ATF has the manpower to send somebody out to confiscate your weapon. But otherwise, so I think that'd be a good thing, is removing the ability to leave without having the background check completed. Number 2 would be to couple that with a funding of mental and physical health services to help reframe the idea that addiction is a disease rather than a crime. And to substantially increase enforcement of the current firearms laws, and find some way to trade with because I'm a single issue voter on guns. If you're against, but I'm also, my vote doesn't matter that much because I vote for people like Joe Jorgensen.
Libertarians.
They're not all good, and the Libertarian Party.
Ooh, what's your thought on like the Mises Caucus?
What's the question on it?
What's your take on the current Libertarian Party?
Oh, dog shit. The leaders. Yeah, I don't even want to talk about it. I do not associate with them.
Okay,
who's in the Mises Caucus right now?
It's like they took over the Libertarian Party.
I mean, I like Mises. I've read a lot of his stuff. The college I went to in Michigan, like I got to sit at the table he wrote his books on and stuff.
That's very cool.
Um, I get infuriated. So I went to this place called Hillsdale College, and it's basically full of conservatives who pretend to be libertarians so they can get laid because they know that
That's wild. That's crazy.
it's a conservative liberal arts school that like in the 90s was a party school, but then like some rich conservatives bought it up and transformed it into the bastion of liberty and constitutionalism. And it does have a good like long liberal history of teaching these things and like being egalitarian, and but it was never a like conservative Christian constitutionalist institution that they put it as today. And I'll go so far as to say it's essentially a white breeding ground. It's where good conservative Christian men and women send their daughters and sons to find a wife or son.
I see. Interesting.
But those people infuriate me. If you're a conservative, be a goddamn conservative. Like otherwise, like don't say you want if you want small government, you have to have small government for everything, not just your taxes, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't want taxes, you're also not banning abortions, or you're also not banning drugs, or you're also things like that. You're not banning immigration. I'm a big open borders advocate. I love immigration. Yada yada yada.
I see. Interesting. I do think there's like, I think it's reasonable to use the government for like very select things. I think the problem with like conservatives is that there's been this like increasing ratcheting up of like, you get your guy into power for 48 years, you take control of the Senate. And then what you do is you just like, you don't decrease spending if you're a Republican. You just like ratchet it up and make sure it's going to like causes that you want. And so I think that that's like a legitimate like big problem where everyone is just like short-term exploiting government profits or exploiting government funds to like pay out to their supporters, and no one is really concerned about like the long-term fiscal stability.
I think it's more about trying to consolidate power out of fear.
How do you mean?
Well, I think a lot of this can be blamed on I'm one of those shitters that'll say every president after Calvin Coolidge was a fucker. But that's just because Calvin Coolidge was the last president before the federal income tax was passed, so he didn't have the money to be a fucker. I think that Turtle Cuck Mitch and his posse of power-hungry poon haters saw an opportunity under the Obama presidency to solidify conservative power in the Supreme Court. And once they got away with it, there was no changing the scope of American politics. Once the Democratic Party can point to what Mitch and the Republicans did under the Obama presidency to deny the appointment of who did they deny?
I don't remember.
But basically deny everybody and keep that spot open for Donald Trump to appoint somebody.
Merrick Garland.
And then RGB dies, which I'm not a fan of RGB, but fuck, I don't want a stacked court. I want five I want it to be, as all things should be, perfectly balanced.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once Mitch did that, it turned every aspect of the United States, legislative branch into a jockeying position of power. Going so far as trying to bait the Democrats into saying that they are going to pack the courts. Oh, we'll just add more justices. That's packing the courts. It's like, what? Would you consider not appointing a justice when you should packing? Like, it's just kind of weird. We're in this era where people can be telling, I don't want to say we're in post-truth, but like my dad, I grew up living with my dad mainly in an all-male household, and we would watch Fox News every night. We'd watch Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson when he finally got around to his bullshit. We'd listen to Mark Levin in the radio. And I've been a lot of different things, and those people didn't inspire me to be my best. When I got to college, I kind of set on the libertarian thing with realistic policy goals. I'm not going to declare Ancapistan. I'm going to say, hey, what if like you let me have a charter city and then we can talk about it? Something like that. But
Well, I think like one of the other issues is just that it's easier to expand government reach and government power than it is to constrain it. And so you see this like this ratchet effect where like the government grows, but then the government is not willing to reduce its size. And so I think that is just like a general principle that is held and, expanded more and more.
It's gotten to the point, in my opinion, that the conservatives can say something factually true without actually believing it, just so that they can support their dog shit arguments. So specifically, and this is the argument that infuriates me more than anything, and I've screamed at my father over this. All of these conservatives that my dad hangs out with, they genuinely believe the line that the Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade increased democracy in the United States, and that's a good thing, and that's in line with constitutional values. And when in reality, they just think abortion is yucky and they want it banned. But now they found their argument to justify that feeling.
Which is like the federalism argument, right?
It's not the federalism argument.
It's specifically like democracy?
Well, it's trying to be the federalism argument. But remember, these are the people that if you say that the United States is a democracy, they'll tell you to shut up. No, you're not. It's wrong. You're wrong. It's a republic.
It's a republic, yeah.
That's the thing. So it's convenient to them when they're increasing democracy, when in reality, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner, whereas we live in a representative democracy. And it just so happens that your representative's father decided to deny a Supreme Court appointment in a grab for power because they were fearful of a changing United States. They were fearful of the Mexicans coming over the border. They were fearful of the fentanyl coming from China. They were fearful of being second place to the euro. And now what is everybody doing? Oh, America's the best. Flight to quality. Wake up, cocksuckers. It's all over. $1 equals 99 euros. Fucking all that shit. So it's American exceptionalism when it's good, and when I like it, and it's liberal communism when it's bad, and I hate it.
And I think you're kind of right, and you're kind of right in the sense that if the shoe were on the other foot, and like conservatives and Republicans had the option to limit abortion through the Supreme Court, they would want that to happen, and that would be like not a democratic solution because the Supreme Court is like not fundamentally a democratic institution. So I think they would be like okay with that in that sense. But I also think that like in a real sense, like the Supreme Court kicking the issue back to the states and back to Congress is effectively like saying, let the people decide instead of letting this, non-democratic institution decide.
Okay.
So they are they're kind of right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think anybody can ever be 100% right. I feel like we've had an okay conversation, even though it's wandered off topic, still very relevant. It's just early on, I think you and I, when I stated it, came to that destiny agreement point of like, it's really hard because the data's not there and we can't be certain about everything we say. So we're going to stick with the middle ground.
At least with like gun rights
with the gun rights discussion and the drug policy stuff. I hope I at least gave you some idea of what you might form your policy prescriptions around, rather than something like an assault weapons ban, which is just totally ineffective.
And like
I want to point out early in your discussion with Sprouticus, you said that access. Well, I don't know if you said it explicitly, but you implied that access to firearms correlates strongly with firearms violence, which is partially true. It correlates strongly in the same way that having a pool in your in your backyard correlates with drownings of children. What more strongly correlates with firearms crime is all other crime, which also correlates with poverty. So the poverty and the gang relation is what mainly drives firearms violence in the United States. If you don't live in a poor area that has a gang, you're like 0.0000. It's like such a tiny percentage of you dying to a gun. You're way more likely to be killed by your doctor in medical malpractice. So you should get good health insurance and not worry about like being shot up in this school.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, I don't have like a clear policy prescription because I think that that's much harder to do. And like, as soon as you came in the call, I was like, yeah, I think that the majority of gun deaths happen as a result of handguns. And you had some interesting statistics that I didn't know about, like the rate of which those gun deaths are due to gang violence. But yeah, like I think that the actual policy prescriptions are like very difficult, which is why in the conversation with Sprouticus, I tried to keep it in like the context of these like abstract hypotheticals of like, if we're imagining like counterfactual USs, where like in one you have like an effective policy for gun control, then what happens to like, gang violence is that it becomes less deadly to have less guns to enact it.
Another good policy that you can advocate for a good way to I assume you're the bread and butter omni-liberal in most cases. A good way, and the most important thing for an omni-liberal or the liberal thing, is to reach across the aisle. And I think another good policy to reach across the aisle with would be national concealed carry reciprocity. Allow every citizen that wishes to register themselves with the federal government as saying, I carry a firearm with me when I drive around. Now, this may not mean in every state you can open carry and concealed carry, but at least keep it in because currently, if the only thing protecting you when you travel across state lines is the National Firearms Act, it has to be stored in a locked container separate from the ammunition and unloaded out of the main cabin of the gun, main cabin of the vehicle. Sorry,
Okay.
he misspoke. Omega lol.
Terrible. No, I get you.
And if you don't follow those laws, that's a federal crime. Or at the it's just very bad if you don't follow these laws. So Shane, if you say, hey, we'll give you national concealed carry reciprocity, that means we now have a semi-complete voluntary database of gun owners who we know are not criminals. That makes it easier to track firearms. And then you say, we'll give you this, but you gotta maybe do healthcare. Or that's the big thing everybody wants is healthcare. I want healthcare. Since the days of Hillary Clinton, I want healthcare. Kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's good. I appreciate you bringing like that kind of more grounded policy discussion into it. I'm like very willing to give ground in that area just because it's not my area of expertise and like I don't necessarily know everything. So yeah, appreciate you coming on.
The last statistic I'll give you, and then I'll get out of here, is the 90s. You got to be really careful when talking about the statistics in the 90s, especially when it comes to Australia and the United States assault weapons ban. The claim that the assault weapons ban in the United States and Australia was effective at reducing gun violence is not exactly substantiated.
Yeah, it's never like a perfect comparison between countries.
because the majority of that drop in violent crime is explained by a global drop in violent crime. Literally every single nation on earth, for some reason in the 90s, had a massive drop in violent crime over the 90s. You can just see like this dip of violent crime, and it has nothing to do with any laws that are passed. Some people are saying it's the effects of removing lead from our water systems and stuff. Some people say it has to do with mystic fertility cults doing rituals under the moonlight. Or
Abortion is another thing.
yeah. Oh yeah, no, abortion was the other major. It was like, yeah. But yeah, if you don't mind, I'm Shaved Dog's Arse. I do stream on Twitch. If you found me annoying, I'm not live now, but I stream at like 4 a.m. CST to about 3 p.m., 5 p.m. CST. You can follow me on Twitter, argue with me there, and if you want to have a discussion on the stream, we can set it up anytime. I'm a market anarchist who likes guns and cute cats. Thanks for having me on, Toft. Sorry for taking up so much of your screen with this ugly mug. But when
it was a good conversation.
I do that thing that, well, I don't know if it's sexist to say that women do. They shave their head after breakups. So whenever I get stressed, I start shaving my head.
I see. It's just like a real-time indicator.
Yeah.
Stress to her. All right.
But thank you for having me on. Have a good rest of your evening.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. That was excellent. He seemed cool. I think that was a really good model of like how you can have a very cool, like chill conversation where both sides are willing to sort of give ground. And I appreciate that. Totally different from the Sprouticus conversation. I think because like with Sprouticus and the more like philosophical side of like how do you govern a country in a vacuum is something that I feel very confident about, and I can make those arguments. But when it comes to like specific policies of like how do you achieve this, I don't necessarily know. And it was really cool to have those statistics. Well, I don't have positions really. Like, haha, he gave ground. You gave 99 yards. He gave 1.5 feet. He won. But like, I don't really have positions. So like, as far as like, what is the ideal policy? So I like, I don't mind giving ground because it's not really like giving ground. All right, I will go. I will be back. I can't believe my Twitch stream crashed. That is so frustrating. Because now I have much fewer viewers to draw in for calls. But I will be right back, and then we will continue. Not much of the conversation was lost. It was only like a minute in the middle. Whoa. Oh, whoa. Oh my god, the bot. Here's the other thing. How the fuck do I... Wait, what is this? how do I prevent bots on the YouTube channel? Is it just mods? Because like on Twitch, you can like auto mod things. You can only ban them as they come? That's so annoying. Interesting, I'll have to check that out. The thing about phrases is that the bots just use like emojis. So they don't actually type things. Next caller. Is anyone in? I don't think anyone's calling. Okay. Listen, it's a small YouTube channel. Oh, I should link the Discord again. Join the Discord, and then you can get into a call, and I'll drag you in. I've been talking about gun control today. The Taliban. The Taliban is so strong. They are always watching. I am in support of gun control. Dude, I did link the Discord, but I'll link it again. Oh, I'll link it in the YouTube chat as well. Okay, we're gonna talk to Izul. Yo,
Hey, how's it going?
how's it going? Going good. What's up, buddy?
Not too much. I just wanted to say I love your OnlyFans.
Oh.
It's worth every penny. You guys should all go sub to it. It brings me great joy.
So
love
true. Listen to
I
him.
love tooming a calf.
He's so
great.
right.
But no, it's genuinely good content, and you guys should do it. And it's just nice to say hi. So hi.
Well, yeah. Hi. Thanks for dropping in.
All right, I gotta go play a game now. So you have a good one. Bye bye.
All right. See you. Amazing. The best call. Okay. Who's next? Ant D. Vulian. Yo. He's silent. He's muted. Tragic. He can't speak.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, what's up, YouTube or Twitch? What's the I forgot exactly what the debate is about. Could you remind me?
We were debating gun control.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I don't support that.
You don't support Sprouticus? Or what don't you support?
Gun control.
Okay, why don't you support gun control?
Well, I just think, I don't think the issue is guns. It's, we have a society that's fractured, you know, low trust, that sort of thing. And honestly, if we look at, the past 500 years, we see that the state grows in size. It becomes a monstrous bureaucratic entity. And I think that needs to be reversed. I don't think that is something that's likely or even easy. But I think what we need to do is reduce state power and create parallel and opposing institutions to the state. And I think gun control just contributes to helping the state, which is bad.
How do I approach this? I think that there are circumstances in which you can trust people to have guns. So I think you can have a community which has like high social trust, high social cooperation, social harmony, low mental health issues. Um, it's rich socioeconomically, so there's little need to engage in crime and so on. You can have a community like that. And that kind of community is the kind that you're going to be able to trust with guns. But the way that you create those communities in the first place is by having a strong, ordered state. So I would say that the principal responsibility of the state is to prevent private tyranny internally, which is crime, and then also to prevent external tyranny, which is like invasion or, coups by foreign governments and so on. And so it's only in that kind of environment where you can foster social harmony, prosperity, and so on. And so I think that when you talk about gun control, it's true that that all of these factors contributed to it. But I think that with crime, there's basically cycles of violence. And so when you have a community which engages, for example, in frequent armed robbery, that makes it so that companies are less able to set up in that community. Therefore, there's less ability for people to be employed, less ability for people to generate wealth, which lasts for generations, and therefore people are more able to engage with crime in the first place. And so really that's a vicious cycle that feeds into itself. And the solution is to put a wrench in that cycle. And the way you do that is by cracking down on crime until the community improves, and then you can relax.
Yeah, I guess I would agree that the goal is to create a healthy society, high trust society, that sort of thing. But there's the organic development of that, and I think someone brought up Switzerland. Switzerland historically was a confederacy of little, they're called cantons, not really relevant, but they were a very decentralized structure of power throughout the Middle Ages and into very recently. And they are a very high trust society. And even then, what the main question is, what produces high trust in a society?
Mhm.
And the answer is, well, it's there's not one answer, but there's a multitude of things. Homogeneity in the realms of culture and religion will contribute to such. If you put, I guess, this isn't completely true in all times, but if you take Christians and you put them next to Muslims, there's likely to be conflict.
I think what people need is a unifying mythology, right? So
Yeah.
if you're going to have people who are very diverse religiously, you need some mythology to unify them. And so I think the United States has been effective, relatively historically speaking, in unifying people who are of different ethnicities and different religions, because people put their faith in something like the American dream. And that doesn't exist in Afghanistan. where you have like massive ethnic conflict and where the Taliban is very easily able to like recruit people because you just have like ethnic warfare. And so that's how I would put it.
I would agree with you, but I would not say you can't really create a unifying mythology between Christians and Muslims because they each of these religious groups already have a unifying mythology, that being their religion. And I'd say the reason that America has been so effective is because people came from the old world to the new world, and they saw America and they wanted to be American, and they abandoned whatever specific traits that made them, Italian or German or
Well,
whatever.
there's a screening effect, right? Like everyone who came shared some qualities incoming.
Yeah, yeah. Christianity was probably, I mean, they were Christian, they were all European, they were all generally sort of, they sort of had this adventurous spirit. They wanted to go to the new world and like found a new way for their family. That's how a lot. That's how most people in the early 20th century. That's the reason they came, is because they wanted the new step. They wanted to sort of like create the new thing for their family or something of that nature.
Well, I don't
But
know
yeah,
if
they
you've
all.
like I don't know if you know about this or if you've like talked to a lot of immigrants, but like I will talk to people who have immigrated to the United States from places like, Nigeria. And these are some of the people who like most strongly believe in the American dream and like American institutions because they were willing to abandon their country and their culture and their family because they believed like so strongly in this vision of America. So you like talk to these people who are like taxi drivers in New York, and they're like some of the most conservative people you would ever speak to. So I think that like when we talk about like American immigration, I think that you're getting at that when you talk about like people from Europe who are traveling to America. They're basically, it's like there's a selection factor where like everyone who is willing to travel to America shares these certain traits of like wanting what they believe like awaits them in the new continent.
Absolutely, that's completely true. I mean, I was more specifically talking about like early 20th century
Oh, but I
immigration.
would just say that like that is also true now with many immigrants.
Um, I'm not exactly sure. I'd say a lot of like probably like 65 to 75% of immigrants, be they legal or illegal, have that at least to some degree, but I'm not sure if it's as like total as it was for a lot of the Europeans who came over.
Well, I think it depends on where you're coming from and how easy it is to come to America. Because if it's difficult to come to America, the only people who are going to do it are the ones who really believe. And if it's easy to come to America, you have people who have all sorts of different opinions coming to America, different cultural values, just because of the economic incentives. And like I got into spats with people on Twitter about this because there's a lot of people who are very like pro open borders on Twitter. And I think what people don't understand is that when you look at immigration to America now, or in the past, when it's like difficult to come to America, that filtering effect really selects for like a certain kind of immigrant. And as you
Yeah,
relax those requirements, you get different kinds of immigrants, and you're going to have different effects as a result of that.
yeah, I would agree. But I guess there's a double-edged sword when you have a multicultural society like America is, and there is the unified mythos. The unified mythos of America being the sort of liberal freedom. Almost like a modern version of Manifest Destiny or something of that nature. But when that mythos starts to disintegrate, as it has been disintegrating over the past decades, the the you could sort of view it like this mythos unifies the disparate different peoples, right? But that is the only thing that unifies them. And
Mhm.
as that mythos starts to disintegrate, so too does the unification of these disparate different groups. And I think we're starting to see the effects of that as people sort of are sort of drawing the borders between their groups. Obviously this is obvious across like racial lines and even ethnic lines and more like I guess diverse groups like Hispanics. But I guess that's the tragedy of this, is that if you don't have an organic unifying character to the people, like ethnicity or religion or blah 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 blah, and it's some sort of ideological philosophical notion like that of America, it's very fragile, and it's begun to fall apart in America. So I'm not exactly sure how much this applies now and even into the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the other thing is that technology has accelerated this. And so in the past, you go back in American history, if you have a town that is diverse, racially, religiously, whatever, those people are in a way forced to get along and to unite around things. And now I think when you have the internet and you have this kind of globalization of culture, you have it so, well, there are like exceptions to this, but like basically you have it so people can find groups for anything. And so they're able to like create coalitions which span the entire country. They're able to find each other, to unify, to break up into smaller communities, to collect together, and to wield political power as groups. And so with that like advent of the internet and the increasing ability for people to sort of group together, I think that it also has accelerated this effect where people are just like more able to find each other and therefore effectively, wield power in a democracy.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Identity. I mean, obviously, we're talking about identity. I guess culture is both a form of and a manifestation of identity. But identity throughout history has been something organic. I think you could look at the ancient Israelites, the ancient Hebrews. They they would literally write down everybody's ancestry. They had it back for thousands of years or whatever, and they all knew that they came from like Abraham or whatever. Whether or not that's true, it's irrelevant. But like there was that organic form of identity. You have that in religion and nation, all sorts of things, and the internet has really started to like destroy those natural organic social bonds in favor of not exactly how you would describe it, but something less organic, something
It's
less solid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think that like inbuilt into humans is like a kind of tribalism and a kind of desire to look out for your own group. And like when you look at, for example, xenophobia and racism, you can really track that down back through time and through human genetics to like, when Native Americans came in contact with Europeans, within a few decades, 90% of them were dead to disease. So there's something very deep within humans that fears outsiders because, in a very real sense, outside groups have historically posed incredible existential danger. And so there's like an inbuilt evolutionary skepticism to other groups. And if you want to overcome that skepticism, you have to have some very powerful force. And I think that technology and so many other things has eroded that force in America. And so a lot of people have returned to those sort of in-group biases. We've seen like this explosion of monkeypox, and we've seen like in the past the AIDS epidemic. And I think that like the internal disgust sensitivity, there's research on this, is like a very good predictor of whether or not someone's going to be homophobic, whether or not they are, how concerned they are about pathogens. And so I think it's no surprise that we also see like pathogen spread occurring at high rates within the homosexual male community. And these things are very connected. And so I think that there's like this evolutionary like tick in people's brains of like skepticism and fear about homosexual relationships, probably because historically it led to prevalence of unique diseases within the community.
Yeah, maybe. But I think another, as well as this, again, the technological aspect of sort of destroying or eroding more, you know, organic forms of identity. I mean, the American dream, the American mythos throughout its entire history has been something very material. It's not just a sort of like liberal idea of freedom. It's freedom to, own land, own a house, and uh, through the economic, forces that have occurred over the past few decades, it's become very hard for younger people to buy homes, to buy really to own anything. And I mean, that's ultimately, if we want to boil the American dream down to something, it's owning something. It's either owning a business, owning, a house, owning a piece of land, homesteading or whatever. And
Mhm.
when that cannot be achieved, as it is, it's becoming increasingly hard to do so for, middle. I mean, it's basically impossible for like poor people now, but it's becoming near impossible for most middle class people, unless you were born into some old money or whatever. You have some trust fund. Most people don't have that. So I think that's another contributing factor to the erosion of the American dream.
Mm.
And I don't think that's gonna, unless we have some, economic mastermind in office soon, that's not gonna change, and it's just gonna continue going downhill for most Americans, most young people. And
Maybe.
also,
Yeah, go on.
they're in the Orthodox Jewish community. What they will do is they will literally, what oftentimes Orthodox Jews in America at least are in like New York. Yeah, most of them are in New York, to my knowledge. And what they'll do is they'll like own businesses or whatever. And what they'll do is when their son or whatever turns like 16, they have their bar mitzvah. Like they will teach their son how to run the business so that when they grow up, when their father dies, they have something. It's
Sounds
not like they're
base.
just.
Sounds good.
It is base. It is base. But white people, black people, Hispanic people maybe lesser. They're more collectivist. What they'll do is like you'll have a house. Your parents will own a house or whatever. And once they die, like they just like sell it or whatever. Like they don't
Mm.
give it to their children. They don't give their kids really anything. This isn't like universal, but it is. It is probably majority, right? And there's this resentment towards inheritance for some reason. I think inheritance, especially if you want to like, if imagine this, your father, your mother, whatever, you own a big business, you own some profitable enterprise, you own a house, you have a large sum of cash, and you die. I don't understand. Wouldn't you want that money to go to your kids to help them start their lives up, to help them start families, own stuff, so they're not like fucking toiling around some wage slave job for the rest of their lives, barely making ends meet. It's like, so that I think like collectivism has declined in America as a whole. It never was very collectivist to begin with, but it's gotten to a point where it's like even even within families is like, yeah, we're family, but when I die, I'm just gonna let everything I've worked for my life just sell to the market. I'm not gonna help my own blood, help my own children, my own grandchildren, and so on with that. It's like we have something missing, some collectivist aspect missing in our society.
I think I saw a meme on Twitter where it was like, this is the average progression of like Jewish immigrants to the United States. And it's like, first generation, you have someone who owns a small business. Second generation, you have a pharmacist. Third generation, you have chairman of the Fed. And fourth generation, you have like some internet blogger who writes like opinion puff pieces. But which I think is, it's funny, and it's like, it's accurate in the sense that like you have groups in the United States who are like very concerned with leaving something for their children. But my understanding of the data is actually that like depending is that like in general most people want to deliver something to their children when they die and throughout the course of their life, but just different groups in America do this better or worse, not out of like desire but just like how much they're earning. So like there's a study, I think, from the University of Chicago that looks at the consumption spending of different ethnic groups. And it concludes that basically there are some ethnic groups that use money, they save money and they invest long term, and they deliver that to generations ahead of them. And that results in like generational wealth building. And there are different ethnic groups that don't do that. They basically engage in like short time orientation spending on like luxury things that don't actually retain value, and therefore they just don't have money to pass on to their children. And so the study ends up concluding that something like 40% of the racial wealth gap between white and black households could be eliminated if consumption spending habits were changed. And so I think that what that tells us is that there's a real difference in how different people engage with spending money. And I think that like anyone who has sort of, basic experience with different, families out in the world is you'll have this like poor family and they have like expensive cars and watches and stuff. And like my tiny rural Colorado town where I grew up in, everyone was white, but like this basically still this logic was still true, where like you had perpetually poor families and they bought all of this consumptive stuff, and then you had these rich families that were like very low key about their wealth but slowly accumulated it after generation after generation.
Yeah. I mean, that I was going to bring that up. Like, if you're poor, it's hard to like get that snowballing effect within your
It is.
family.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big issue. I mean, once you get once you get a ton of money, it's unless you have like retarded kids or something, like you can snowball that money in your family for a while. And that's where like the Boston Brahmins came from. That's what old money is. Yeah. I guess I don't know how. I get yeah. Like poor spending habits. Like you learn your spending habits from your parents a lot. So if you have poor or parents with bad spending habits, it's like I guess we could talk about that in school. I don't know how feasible that is. You have to talk to us
Interestingly,
about that.
there's also studies on like education, and they show that like as people become more educated, the gap in like spending habits actually widens. So you look at like Asian people in the United States, and they have like the most long-term spending habits. So like the most long-term investment and the most savings. And unfortunately, like black people have the most short-term spending habits. And so like when you look at people who are educated in both of these racial groups, after education, the gap actually widens. And I think part of that is like education can give you in some ways like the tools to justify pre-existing beliefs. So I think that like in regards to education, it is really something that probably needs to happen like very early on, and very like culturally. It needs to be something that's like suffused into how people grow up, rather than just like they go to like a high school finance class or like a college finance class.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. A lot of these problems are like very deeply rooted in our society. It's not
Yeah,
just a matter of education.
yeah, for sure. Which is
It's like a matter of
frustrating
mere structure.
because you want to like improve things. You want people to be wealthy and happy and prosperous, but like it's very difficult to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'd say generally speaking, in the past, people had better tendencies, better overall things were better in some respect at least. And like a lot of that just happened organically from the natural development of human society through history. And it's really hard to emulate that in a point in time where a lot of that has been lost either purposefully or through like just we forgot or something, like it was lost between in translation or something. I'm not
Yeah,
exactly sure a lot of these problems are, like we can come up with solutions, but like the realistic, like how realistic it is that these solutions will actually come about or be implemented is questionable. I'm not exactly sure a lot of these things are like, they're probably not going to be solved, even if they are solvable, hypothetically. I guess that's pretty pessimistic, but it just seems true to me.
Interesting. Why do you think that's the case? Just because there isn't like political will to solve things?
Well, what it's like, first of all, what needs to be done? That's if you can't answer that question, it's like, what are we even doing? What needs to be done and even then, that's like a broad question. But once you answer that question, like what needs to be done, well, now you need to find the people who have the power to do it. And generally speaking, that's like, if we're talking like federal issues, it's Congress or whatever. And how, I don't really think most people are educated on the problems or how problems are to be solved. So it's like if we are going to have these people voting, we're just one or two people. We can't really have a large effect on the voting pool. It's obviously within the masses, at least if we want to go about this like legitimately, legislatively. So it's like, how do we spread this message? How do we tell people like, here's a problem, and well, okay, well now the masses know about the problem, but like I'm kind of rambling here. I'm incoherent, but let me try to distill what I'm saying. Let's assume the masses know the problem. Like the constituency knows about the problem that needs to be solved. Well, now they can go to the polls and vote for like presidents or representatives, but that assumes like the system is straightforward, it's not corrupt, like we can find people who actually want to solve the problems in the system. And that's like obviously not true. The system is entirely corrupt. Most things are like in the state legislators, that sort of thing. Even then, like most people are already like all politicians assume like a liberal worldview. They're all about like freedom, that sort of thing. Like they don't really want to engage with the problems. It's like there's not really a way to engage with the modern American political system and affect things, right? I saw a study. It was a while ago. If I could probably find it if I looked a little bit, but they found like out of 1,000 political issues, the mass opinion had like virtually no impact on how it turned out in the legislator.
I think I'm familiar with the study that you're talking about. Like
Yeah, so
what
it's
really
like,
matters is the elite opinion and the opinion of
yeah,
special
yeah.
interest
I mean,
groups.
yeah, it's elite theory. It's been proven true or whatever. And so it's like, I guess, this. I don't want to. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to. So I don't want to get you banned or anything. But we have to look towards, radical political movements in the past and how they structured themselves and how they affected real change. And the answer is not through voting. All revolutionary political movements realize this very early on. It's not in the vote. Most change does not come through the vote. It's in the elite of a group, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is about America is that the elite is like totally captured by the left wing. And
Yeah.
they're totally captured because like all the elite institutions, the institutions that basically groom people to be part of the elite, are incredibly left wing. So I mean, I think this is like the huge problem with the Republican strategy is that it's like very populist, and it's very much like based on these like, just appealing to popular sentiments, while ceding like the actual cultural institutions and power to the left
Yeah.
wing.
Yeah, that's why the right wing up until recently has been like very ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, if you pick up any like real political theorist like Machiavelli or someone like that, you'll realize it's
Gaetano
never been in the
Mosca.
vote. What was that?
Gaetano Mosca or
Oh yeah,
Mosca.
Mosca, Pareto,
Burnham.
Kells. Yeah, Burnham. Any of these people, like these. I'm honestly glad like a lot of these people are not popular, but these are the answers to our political. This is political change, right? It's not. I keep repeating it, but it's like it's true. It's like, Beto O'Rourke is not gonna change anything. The masses don't change anything. It's like it's like the project in front of us. What needs to be done. It's like really monumental. And I don't really think that there's any movement or organization that really has the chops or the like the sort of political know-how to do what needs to be done.
Well, people, they elected Trump, right? And they elected Trump because he promised sort of things like, well, I'm gonna drain the swamp. I'm gonna clear them out.
Yeah.
And obviously he did not, because the like army of unelected civil servants and bureaucrats like totally constrains the power of the presidency. And I had a conversation with like a Democrat he was trying to convince me to like vote Democrat. And what I was telling him is that like I do not mind if the Republicans are like losing elections, because I think that like you shouldn't try to take power until you know that you can take real power. And as long as you're just like putting someone in the White House for 4 to 8 years and you know that nothing's really going to get done, what you're effectively doing is like you're making promises to people and then you're unable to deliver on them. And that actually weakens your power long term. And so what you need to do is like you need to be willing to wait and to take time to actually gather the strength to actually make effective change. And that's when you want to be in power, is when you can actually like do things. And until you can actually do things, there is no point in pursuing like short-term political victories that result in just like, frankly, like expanding the size of the government for the benefit of, short-term payouts to people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's sort of like how do you say? Like all the great revolutionaries, like Vladimir Lenin, uh I'm not exactly sure who I think like Robespierre, maybe, I don't know. Whoever led the leaders of the French Revolution, you know, H. Man, all these people, they were great organizers, they knew what was going on. How they understood politics. And the conservatives in America, they don't, you know. It's just like, come on.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
no,
they're like a
sorry.
prey party for the Democrats.
Yeah,
Like
essentially.
they basically exist to like play fools. And as long as they are not like a real threat to the the American political machine, they're not going to be like stamped out. And so they like survive basically by like existing in this paradigm where they're not actually trying to take like long-term power. They
Yeah.
just sort of like, pass the ball back and forth with Democrats.
I mean, yeah, the Republican Party or whatever. I mean, it really represents like nothing. It hasn't represented anything. I mean, Trump as a figure, he was sort of like I don't really know how to describe him, but he wasn't this mastermind that a lot of people like to
He
make
wasn't
fun
playing
of.
4D chess.
Yeah, he wasn't. He was playing 2D chess or something. I don't know what he was doing, but he just like he was. I think he's a great example of an ineffect. He was an ineffective political ruler, and I think this was not sure if you're familiar with Carl Schmitt, but this was very clearly shown in uh, right after the election in 2020 when Trump had lost, according to all the national polls or whatever. And he went to like 1,000 local judges or whatever, and they were trying to like repeal this, and they just got shot down every time. And it was like who is sovereign? Who controls America, who possesses power? And it's not Trump. It wasn't ever Trump, because if Trump ever held power, if he did hold power at that time, he would have been able to be successful in his move to repeal the election. Uh, he who decides the exception is sovereign or whatever. It's
Mhm.
like he never possessed political power. Maybe a little bit, but nothing substantial, nothing where he could really change America. And January 6th proved that the whatever the election fraud thing changed it and or approved it. And I think, yeah, Trump is a really great example of a ineffective, powerless leader. A very historically, a very powerful leader would be someone like Like Napoleon.
Mhm.
Napoleon could do anything he wanted. You know, there were no limits on him. He had total political control, and I mean, this is even beyond the like, you know, when after he did the 1804 reform or whatever. Like he could do whatever he wanted, even within the triumvirate consulship. He was the dominant. He held all the power after after he did the coup. Napoleon was powerful. He was sovereign in France at that time. Trump wasn't. Trump was a you know, he was like a kindergartner or something. He didn't know what he was doing at all. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it was just he was, you know, he was dealt a hand of cards that was like, you know, just shit. He couldn't have done anything, honestly. It was a losing battle from the start.
Yeah, I mean, like, another good example from American history is like FDR. FDR had like real
Yeah,
power,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he was actually able to do things. And I think that like part of the problem too with the Republicans is that like even if it's something that like I don't agree on Republicans with, like they just aren't able to command respect because
yeah,
they don't have like convictions. I think that, you know, you see like the Republican Party just constantly gives ground. And like you have Caitlyn Jenner running in, you know, California, like she's a Republican and people are supporting her. And like, you know, I'm trans. I support like trans people being able to live and whatnot. But like, and so if the Republican Party actually took like a hardline stance that was like long term and lasting, like against like gay rights or trans rights, I wouldn't agree with that. But at least it would be like, it would be a stance and it would have like conviction and it would command respect. But like the Republican Party lacks the will or the conviction to actually do that. And so what they are going to do on every social issue is take a hardline stance for 10 years and then they're going to back away from it.
yeah.
And it's just not the way to actually like command respect.
Yeah, another example of that would be the in the House recently, the gay marriage bill.
Mhm.
I'm not very familiar on the details of the bill itself, but there were like something like 46, 40, like 50 Republican representatives voted you know, opposite their party stance. Not only is it a party, not only are the Republicans like not principled, they're also not unified. They're not morally unified within the party itself. Just like you said, the Caitlyn Jenner ran for governor or whatever as a Republican. And it's like this is an example of an organization that doesn't have any unification. And it's just like it's like, oh, I'm like slightly more right wing than it's like it's really weird because then you have people like Caitlyn Jenner, I'd say are probably like, you know, slightly right wing. And then you have people like what's his name? Like Blake Masters, who's like, you know, Trump reincarnate or something. I don't know.
You have people like
It's
John Hawley on the other side, yeah.
yeah, it's like they no one no one in that party knows what's going on. You have it's just yeah, it's nothing. It's nothing really.
Yeah,
The Demo
it's
yeah.
grim.
Yeah, the Democrats are unified at least. You
Mhm.
can say they're evil or whatever, but you know, at least they're politically effective, at the very least. At least in the in the federal government.
Mhm. Yeah, crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
All right. I think I'm gonna go. Pleasure talking to you. Great stream. Have a wonderful night and whatever, you know.
for sure. Tell your friends about me. I need
I will, definitely.
I need
Bye-bye.
less people who are annoying to talk to. All
Yeah. All right, see ya.
right, see ya. Bro, banger conversation. Um, I think it's hard to continue the conversation from there because like it requires like sort of backtracking and exploring all the ways that Republicans like are strong and Democrats are weak. And so like I think that Republicans were like very strong and convicted on abortion. And so you sort of have to like give ground on that and you have to like describe areas where the Democrats are like not so strong. And like there are instances of this. I think that like the fundamental truth though is that the place where Democrats are strong matters, and the place where Republicans are strong doesn't matter. Because the place where Democrats are strong results in the Democrats becoming stronger over time. And the place where Republicans are strong is like, it's a moral victory for Republicans that they are returning abortion back to the states. But for Democrats, it's like, well, we're going to control institutions and we're going to embed our politics very deep so that over time we get more and more victories. Yeah. Will I have another conversation? I'm going for 3 hours. Let's do a short conversation. Sure. Averin. Gamer, what's up?
Hello, hear me.
I can hear you.
So I take issue with you saying that the Democrats have power where it matters and Republicans don't.
Okay. Yeah, tell me about it.
So I will say that Democrats have, or we'll just say liberals in general, have power in cultural places.
Mhm.
But I think that when you look at what actually affects the gathering of power, you're looking primarily at the judicial and at sort of the state level voting because of the electoral college. And I think Republicans have the power in those places right now.
So I think that the thing about like state power and about something like the electoral college is that it biases towards the Republicans. At least right now, it biases towards the Republicans because the
Well, I think
Democrats.
in general, wouldn't you say that even disregarding gerrymandering, that the electoral college by itself benefits Republicans because of the rural divide?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, because Democrats tend to live in cities, and
hmm
yeah, so
But then
they
also,
occupy less actual territory, actual land, and that's how
yeah.
voting power is distributed.
But I think on top of that, you also have the state legislatures are the ones that are drawing the districts,
Mhm.
and those have been pretty heavily gerrymandered.
In Republican states, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, well, I guess like the problem with gerrymandering is that like it's sort of an intractable problem. Where like you can't really not gerrymander, and it's in some
Yeah,
sense
I
just
agree.
like you try to gerrymander as safely as possible, but like Democrats also do it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I guess my question would be, where are the liberals entrenching their values in a way that gains them power, except for like on Twitter?
So I would say that liberals tend to be much more well educated than Republicans. And more educated people are able to wield more power on average than less educated people. And so
Do you mean that they're more likely to have power, or that they're more likely to use it effectively?
both. Yeah, both. So if you're more educated, you're going to have a better chance of accessing like internal government institutions
Mhm.
as, like you're more likely to end up as a chairman of the Fed or someone
Right.
who's working in, the
Like
FBI
you
or
can even
whatever.
shortcut that and say a lawyer is more likely to be those things, and a liberal person is more likely to be a lawyer than.
Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
And so I think liberals are really good at like capturing the elite interests of people, and Republicans are not good at that. And so liberals have an advantage in that sense.
Now, is that just because I agree with that in principle,
Mhm.
but I don't see the effect of it, because it seems like what power has come down to is winning elections. And then as long as there are enough conservatives who are qualified to effectively wield that power, once they get elected, as long as those are the people that get elected. Like this is the small part of what I agree with the last guy, is that Trump could have done a whole lot more damage than he did, or been more effective than he was, depending on your perspective. But he still got elected, and the Supreme Court is a direct result of that election, as are what, thousands, tens of thousands of judicial appointees. And those people aren't idiots, the people that are being appointed to the judicial.
Yeah. So I think that like when we look at the Supreme Court, I guess this hasn't like played out yet, as far as I'm aware. It could play out in the future where this is true. But
Well, I mean, Roe v. Wade is kind of a big deal.
well, no, let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay,
Because like it could play out where it's true that by putting these justices in in these lower level courts, but also in the Supreme Court, you actually like entrench Republican power over the long term. That might be true. But I think so far, what we've seen as a result of that is that Republicans or conservatives get victories with things like abortion, where that's being kicked back to the states, but that's not actually going to give, like, abortion being kicked back to the states
Right.
is not the kind of thing that is going to give Republicans like a stepping stone to more power. Like
Right.
it's a
So it's
moral
like they're
victory.
buying something rather than investing that power.
Yeah, exactly. And so like when we look at the presidency, like could you get rid of the presidency and have the government like still function? And the answer is like, yeah, you can. Because the institutions that have built up around the presidency will continue to operate effectively with or without an effective president. And so those institutions are primarily like, they primarily employ people who are well educated and who are liberal.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said in that the president directs the departments of the executive branch. So, those, I guess I'm not sure that
But like,
there
look at
wouldn't be
like
some amount of like consternation between the various departments if they didn't have a figurehead.
look at
I-
like the
but I don't think
EPA,
most people.
right? If you
Mhm.
like, if someone who's like very right wing gets into the presidency, and they like appoint someone as head of the EPA, and the person that they appoint as head of the EPA is like very interested in reducing environmental restrictions, allowing companies to do more, orienting more towards like a free market approach. It sort of doesn't matter if they do that because his organization is going to fight him every step of the way for that, for everyone down the line. And so like that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about like liberal power, is like the ability for liberals in these positions to totally constrain like the power of individuals who are like appointed by a president.
Does that happen?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like
I don't have a good
when Trump
example.
was in office, like, I mean, you get what news you get, but most of the stuff like that was me hearing stories of people at the EPA or at the National Weather Service or whatever the department was, that whatever day of the week, basically everyone who could be reappointed was reappointed, and then the rest of the staff was just being shit on by people they disagreed with.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that Trump was like constantly reappointing people. But like the reason why he was reappointing people is because like people just like were not able to get done what he wanted them to get done. And even though he reappointed people, he was still not able to like achieve his ultimate goals. And it was like very, from what I understand, like very frustrating for the Trump administration and for Trump himself, who's like he's used to this like sort of private organization where you can like hire and fire people and you can get things done, and if someone's not working for you, like you can get rid of them. But in the government there's like so many more restrictions for
Isn't that the
how
point of an
processes
institution,
work.
though?
I'm sorry, what?
Isn't that the point of an institution, to kind of like have some kind of old guard, that so that a president can't just come in and start changing the entire direction of whatever the thing is?
Yeah, yes. So like the thing about the United States government and how power is wielded is that there are all sorts of barriers and restrictions in place to prevent like tyranny of the government, basically. So
Mhm.
like the reason why we have democracy is like democracy is really like a trade-off, and it's a trade-off of like efficiency for structure and like control. They're able to like restrain the power of the president, and so the amount of damage that they can do in like any direction is limited. And so I think you see that with like these institutions where you prevent one person from like overturning things and implementing new stuff. But like the end result of those restrictions and the added like red tape and bureaucracy that it requires to get rid of people who have been in these positions for a while, the end result of that is that liberals have more power because liberals are able to effectively occupy these positions.
Yeah, I think I agree, but from my perspective, I think that they occupy those positions because they're educated, not.
It is because they're educated. Well, it's partially
I think
because they're
I
educated.
think their education qualifies them. I probably think their education gives them more qualification than you do.
I
If
think
they're
their
ultimately wielding what ends up being political power.
I think their education does give them qualification, but I think the problem is the incentive structure. So, like, we can imagine a different incentive structure where you have a ruler who's able to like get rid of people and re-implement them. And what that ruler will do is he'll set like a specific policy goal, like get this done or get fired, basically.
Mhm.
And he will hire like the most effective people for that job, and they can
Ideally.
either yeah, like well, he has incentive to do this.
Yeah.
But like how do I say this? Hire those people, and if they don't get the job done, he can fire them.
hmm
But with like entrenched civil servants and bureaucracy, is those people are like then able to exert their sort of their political will on the institution because they like are not ultimately accountable to, or they're less accountable to whatever administration is in charge.
Yeah. I guess I like that, but it's hard to. I would claim that I like that because of from its sort of grounding principles, and not because the people that I tend to agree with tend to be in those positions. But it's I can't imagine the counterfactual, so I can't say for sure that how I would feel if it were the other way around.
So I drew like a comic a while ago where it was like envisioning how transgender policy would be set in an autocratic system with like an accountable monarch. And basically, it was like 4 panels, I think. And in the first panel, it showed the king, and he said something like, "This is my land, and I can extract like whatever rents I want from it." And then panel 2 is someone who says, "Sir, there's a problem. People like want transgender healthcare, but there's like debate among your citizenry of what would be appropriate." Then panel 3 is the king, and he says, "Well, I want to be able to extract as much as I can from the population. So what really matters is like if a population is happy and productive, that's good." So he's like, "All right, well, I'm going to task these experts to figure out what is going to result in people being the most happy and productive." And then he like, he acquires these experts, and they say, "Well, what's probably best is like give trans people access to HRT. And we're going to like run this experiment, this like natural experiment where we allow people access to HRT. And if it results well, these experts are going to get rewarded. And if it results poorly, they're going to be punished." And so I think that's like a system where you have an autocrat who's able to like hire and fire people at will. And it results in kind of what is like most efficient or most productive. But in a scenario where you have people where you have like a democratic system, and the democratic system is trying to figure out what transgender healthcare policy should be, is you have these people who really are not experts at all, who are basically like ideologues, and you have some like random person who just thinks that like trans people are gross. Well, it turns out that like the person who thinks that trans people are just kind of gross, like has power in the institution, and he's able to like exert his influence, even though like it's totally irrelevant to actually what matters. And so I think that like experts really should be making the decisions, but that they should be accountable. And so like if we look at climate policy, the problem with having like unaccountable climate experts is that you have this group that like has an incentive to like justify their jobs, and so they're going to like continually find reasons why they need to be in power and why they need to be, you know, given like ability to restrict and control the economy to optimize for things. And as long as they're in power, they're just going to like entrench themselves more, and they're going to optimize to like keep their power, regardless of the actual like effect that has on the country as a whole. So I think really the issue is like accountability and incentive structure. And you want experts in both cases, but in the case where these people are like not accountable to a system of like direct checks and balances, they're able to just like entrench themselves for their own political gain.
Wouldn't that paradigm apply equally to the head of state?
What do you mean?
Are we saying, are we talking about, so the sort of autocrat example makes sense, except for that I'm not sure that any sort of autocrat has ever been that good faith in their motivations. And then also, so if we can assume that a head of state is going to do everything, even in terms of what's best for what they want for the country, even if I disagree with what they want for the country, that makes more sense to me. But historically, it seems like the president is not immune to optimizing for their own power.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so this is why I think you need like some sort of mechanism to make sure that the head of state is accountable. And so I think that like one of these is democracy. Another way would be like competition. And we sort of get into this like very weird world where we're imagining like, you know, complete historical counterfactuals. But I think it would be like interesting if, and I'd like to like write a piece on this eventually, but like if the US government were to say that like, all right, we're going to auction off a piece of land, and in that piece of land, whoever buys it from us can set like whatever laws they want within the bounds of the Constitution. So, you know, you can't like torture people, you can't like do all of these crazy things, but like as long as they're within the bounds of the Constitution, you set whatever it is. And like the piece of land is effectively going to be worth like at minimum the time discounted price of all the taxes that whoever the owner is would eventually pay. So like if Elon Musk wants to buy this piece of land, he could live on it and like never pay taxes to the government again. So like at minimum, the piece of land is worth like that amount of taxes.
Sure. Yeah.
But actually it's worth like a lot more because Elon Musk can incentivize people to move there, and then he can tax their productivity as well. So Elon Musk is effectively an autocrat on this piece of land, and people can move there and he can set rules however he wants. And so then the question becomes like, how do you make him accountable? And well, I think like a really interesting way to do that is to say, you can have this piece of land, but you have to make it so that anyone who wants to move out of this piece of land has like an easy time doing so, right? And the way that might manifest is saying that like if you want to move to this piece of land, Elon Musk has to set up like $1,000 grant to like move out, right? So basically the way that Elon Musk is held accountable is that in order to keep people like people can leave at any time for any reason.
Mhm.
And so basically he can't rule in a way that is too destructive, otherwise people will just leave and he'll lose
Right.
profits.
Everyone wants to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And so that would be like a system of making the ruler accountable because people can vote with their feet.
I
But
don't know how
like
you get anywhere near that in reality, though.
I think
I
I'd like
mean,
to
I have
like
an idea. How
yeah.
about how about 35% of the country? Everyone has a button,
Mhm.
and if 35% of the country hits the button, the current president is launched into space.
I think that would be probably not good.
Yeah, but eventually, we'd end up with someone who is so terrified.
Who's so terrified? Well,
Yeah,
no,
they're
okay, so like the way I think it'd be bad is because like as soon as things go slightly bad, 30% of people are going to launch them into space.
yeah. So wouldn't we eventually get someone who just never does anything bad?
Well, I think what you'd get is people who like are constantly afraid of being launched into space. And so they're always pursuing like short-term benefit for people, right? So they're always doing what's like popular at the moment, but not what is good like long term. And what you really need to do is like create systems where people are like incentivized not to just go for like short-term benefits, but actual like long-term solutions. And
I
so
just don't know how you do that without people being like you have like how do you do that to for self-interested humans without like if we'd have to get rid of term limits, and at that point you have self-interested humans in power without term limits.
which I think would be a good start for sure, because like or
Oh,
or just
I don't
like
know. I don't know. That
yeah.
sounds like evil king territory.
I mean, I think part of the problem is that like once you've been in power, once you've been a president for 8 years, you're kicked out. You're not allowed to run again. But after you've been a president for 8 years, you're like most qualified to continue to be president
Mhm.
because you have the most skills. So like
True.
in a way, I think it's like sort of backwards that we like prevent people from continuing to be in power, the better they're able to rule.
I agree with that on those principles alone, but I think there are so many external factors that are like the justification for the term limits. Like if we could address all of that somehow, I would be in favor of it, but I don't know how we address everything else, all the justifications for term limits. Um, because humans are fundamentally self-interested, and wealth and power makes people generally start to turn awful.
Mhm. Yeah, and so this is why like you need the ability to get rid of people if they're doing poorly. Um, but you have to have the kinds of people who are able to get rid of the monarch need to be the kind of people who are long-term time oriented. So they're interested in the long-term future rather than just the short term. And so like you look at corporations, right? Corporations are pretty like there's an explore exploit trade-off, but like a lot of times shareholders are interested in what's going to happen 20 years into the future, not
I
just
disagree.
you disagree really.
Yeah, I think year over year is what drives shareholders.
Hmm. So I think that corporations are like good at making sacrifices for the benefit of the long term, because if they're not good at this, they get like outcompeted long term by
Yeah, I think corporations are like their boards a lot of the time are.
well, the board is elected by the shareholders.
Yes, but I think so like my experience working for corporations has always been what is our growth compared to last year? We need to do any means necessary compared to last year,
Hmm.
last quarter even sometimes. Usually it's year over year because of holiday cycles and that sort of thing. Um, I don't know, like I think you're right in that the shareholders elect the board, but there's also like there's a lot of entrenched power. There's like sort of incumbent bias to board members as well that I think protects them in some ways. But if you have a company that loses money for like 3 years in a row, I think you're going to start to see like CEOs get fired over that kind of stuff.
It probably depends on the industry, is the thing.
Yeah.
So like
Mhm.
this is what I alluded to with like the explore exploit trade-off, where like you have all of these companies in the tech bubble in San Francisco who will return like negative income or like negative profits year after year, but their value just like skyrockets over
Yeah.
time. And so why is this? Well, it's because people expect the company to like later return lots of profits. And so they are like future oriented in this way because they believe in the industry that the company's in being like very important in the future. Whereas I think
I think
that
some of it might be fashion investing,
that
or people who are going
maybe,
to try to sell before the bubble bursts. But I
yeah,
think there's definitely some of the people that you're describing sort
yeah.
of see that long-term vision.
Whereas I think that there are other industries where people are not very confident in like long-term um, long-term success, or like long-term success really just does like depend on short-term success. So like
Mhm.
the movie industry is one where like you need to be like constantly having these short-term successes, and like the video game industry is like this too. And so the kinds of projects that get funded are not like visionary like gambles. They tend to be like very safe, right?
Mhm.
So you get like the same sort of franchises like pumped out year after year. And that is like a kind of it's a short-term desire to just like make money the next quarter. So I do think it varies from industry to industry. I think
Yeah,
governments
I
are
think
the
it
kind
is.
of industry where they really benefit from long-term orientation.
Oh, they do for
Yeah,
sure. I just like I think government would be awesome if it was run by not humans. I think
maybe so. Or at
almost
least
all of the
humans with
problems
like lives who
parts
last for thousands of years.
or specific parts of their brains removed,
Yeah.
maybe.
Well, okay. If you want to get like really, I don't know, esoteric here, I think that religion is like very good at getting people to act
Oh
irrationally
yeah.
and like
That's
believe
like
in
I
things
think
that are,
that's as someone who's like was atheist for a while and is agnostic now because I guess I'm getting old and things look weird sometimes. Uh, I think religion is absolutely like people talk a big game about their morals and whatnot, but like moment to moment and even sometimes not moment to moment, we're very desire driven creatures, and religion does, if you believe in it, it provides a check on that.
yeah, like consider the people who believe very seriously that they will exist long after their death and they'll be able to like watch what their grandchildren are doing.
Hmm.
These people like have a real like reason to like save for after their death and to like plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in, because perhaps irrationally they believe that they're going to exist,
Hmm.
past their death. And so I think that like, the one of the reasons why pretty much every culture on earth has like these spiritual beliefs is because communities that had spiritual beliefs outcompeted communities that didn't, because they were able to induce like economically irrational behaviors that benefited the group overall.
Well, and especially back when humans killing other humans was much higher of an evolutionary pressure.
Yeah, for
It
sure,
makes a
for
big
sure.
difference when most of your people believe that killing another person is wrong.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. There's so much more to go into as far as like the
Hmm.
evolutionary pressure, especially around like states and the kind of global hegemony that the US now has. Like I think in some way that's like arrested the the competition and the experimentation between
Right.
states. But
Yeah, it's not just like it's not just literal genetic evolutionary pressure, but in terms of like sociological evolution.
for sure. But I'm going to put a pin in it and probably end the stream.
Yeah, get out of here. All right, thanks
But
for having me on.
thank you so much for talking to me, because I think you provided a really valuable pushback. And like, I do think you forced me to question some of my beliefs. And I think that that's incredibly special and always valuable. So thank you so much for being in chat when you were. I think you really added a lot, and I want to thank you for that.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good
Yeah.
night.
You too.
Bye.
That was really great. Oh my God. I think that he made a lot of really good points. And I was definitely at points in that conversation thinking like, that's smart. That's true. How is that? How do I argue against that? So that's really cool. I think that's really awesome. And if anyone else, like, you're ever seeing me streaming and you're like, I disagree with you on that, write at me, tell me, ask to be on stream, because that is how I evolve as a thinker, is if I'm getting challenged by people who are bringing up really good criticisms. So my voice is shot. I'm going to go to bed. I love you guys. Or not go to bed, but I'm going to eat dinner. It's going to be great. Bye, everybody.